The Montana Territory stretched endless and cruel under an October sky the color of old iron. Ronan Hale had learned not to expect softness from it. 28 years on this earth had taught him that the land took more than it gave. And people were worse. They smiled when they wanted something, made promises that lasted about as long as morning frost, and left when staying got hard. So he'd stopped asking for anything beyond what he could build with his own two hands, which is why the arrangement had made sense. A practical marriage. No romance, no expectations. A woman who needed security. A man who needed help running a ranch that fought him every single day. Mrs. Havering's catalog service promised discretion and efficiency. He'd written his requirements clearly. Someone plain, someone competent, someone who understood that frontier life wasn't a fairy tale. Someone who wouldn't ask questions about the past or expect answers about the future. The woman standing in his doorway was none of those things. Ronan's grip tightened on the Winchester, though he hadn't actually pointed it at her. Not quite. Behind the stranger, Jesse Crawford, the supply wagon driver, was already unloading two trunks that looked far too expensive for homesteader country. The old man caught Ronan's eye and shrugged, palms up, as if to say, "Don't shoot the messenger." "You gonna put that down?" the woman said. "Or are we doing this the hard way?" Her voice carried an edge that wasn't fear. East Coast, probably. Boston or New York. Educated. The kind of accent that didn't belong within 500 miles of here. She wore a traveling dress that had once been fine. Dark blue wool, good stitching, but the hem showed trail dust and the sleeves had been let out and resewn at least once. She'd fallen on hard times, maybe, but she carried herself like someone who'd never quite accepted it. "There's been a mistake," Ronan said. "Has there?" Not a question. She stepped fully into the cabin without waiting for invitation, her eyes sweeping the single room with an assessment that felt uncomfortably thorough. He watched her take in the cold stove, the unmade bed shoved against the far wall, the table buried under account books and old correspondence, the rifle rack, the whiskey bottle, the complete absence of anything resembling comfort. She turned back to him. "You Ronan Hale?" "I am." "Then there's no mistake. I'm Lila Mercer. Mrs. Havering sent me." She pulled a folded letter from her sleeve and held it out. "Your correspondent specified someone competent and unburdened by romantic illusions. I assure you I qualify on both counts." Ronan didn't take the letter. "I specified plain." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but he didn't take them back. Better to be clear now than deal with misunderstandings later. Something flickered across her face, too fast to name. Then that dangerous smile returned. How flattering. "You know, most men at least pretend to have manners before revealing their jackasses." Behind them, Jesse Crawford made a choking sound that might have been a laugh. Ronan shot him a look that could freeze water, and the old man suddenly became very interested in adjusting the wagon's brake. "Ma'am," Ronan started. "Miss," she corrected. "For another few hours, anyway, since I understand we're meant to marry today. Unless you've changed your mind, in which case I'll need immediate transport back to Timber Falls and compensation for my travel expenses." She paused. "Which, according to our contract, you're obligated to provide if you refuse the arrangement without cause." "Without cause?" He gestured at her with his free hand, careful not to let the rifle's barrel drift her direction. "You're not what was advertised. Neither is this ranch, I'd wager." Her gaze went to the window where the view showed a corral that needed mending, a barn with a sagging roof, and fields gone to seed. "Your letter promised a working homestead with sufficient housing and stable income. What I see is a half-finished operation and a man who apparently greets visitors with firearms." "This is the frontier," Ronan said. "We greet strangers with caution." "I'm not a stranger. I'm your intended wife. There's a difference." She moved past him, actually brushed past him, and began unpinning her hat. Dark curls spilled loose as she set it on the table, pushing aside his papers without ceremony. "Though I'm beginning to wonder if you know the difference between caution and paranoia." Heat crawled up Ronan's neck. He'd spent 3 years building this place alone after his partner, after Thomas. He shut that thought down hard. "Miss Mercer," he kept his voice level through sheer will. "I don't know what Mrs. Havering told you, but this arrangement requires someone who can work. Hard work. Sun up to sundown. Someone who won't what? She turned to face him, and there was steel under the civility now. Won't expect to be treated like a human being? Won't mind being ordered like hired help? Won't notice that you're trying very hard to convince yourself you don't need help at all? The accuracy of it hit like a fist. Ronan's jaw tightened. I can work, Lila continued. I've kept house for my father's medical practice since I was 14. I can cook, clean, mend, garden, keep accounts, and apparently manage men who've forgotten basic courtesy. What I won't do is apologize for not meeting your expectation of ugliness. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Outside, Jesse cleared his throat. Mr. Hale? Where'd you want these trunks? Ronan didn't answer. He was staring at Lila Mercer, trying to reconcile the sharp-tongued woman in front of him with the vague, forgettable person he'd imagined. Someone who'd blend into the background. Someone safe. This woman was about as safe as a wildfire. Leave them on the porch, he finally called to Jesse. Lila's eyebrows rose. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. Ronan set the rifle in its rack, mostly because his hands needed something to do that wasn't threatening. You want the truth? I don't trust this. You show up looking like… He stopped himself. Like what, Mr. Hale? Like someone who'd make him remember things he'd spent 3 years trying to forget. Like someone who'd ask questions and demand real answers. Like someone who'd see through the walls he'd built and find the wreckage underneath. Like you don't belong here, he said instead. Well, she pulled off her gloves, finger by finger, with deliberate care. That makes 2 of us, doesn't it? Because you look like someone who doesn't belong anywhere at all. The observation landed with uncomfortable precision. Ronan felt something old and familiar twist in his chest, the urge to walk away, to close doors, to retreat into the kind of silence that couldn't hurt him. He'd gotten good at that. After Thomas died, after the accusations and the whispers and the realization that building a life with another person just meant building something that could be destroyed. He'd gotten very good at it. But he'd also gotten tired. Tired of fighting the land alone. Tired of watching his ranch slowly fail because one man couldn't do the work of 2. Tired of the empty cabin and the silence that pressed in during the long winters. That's why he'd written to Mrs. Havering. Not for companionship. He'd killed that want years ago. For practical help. For survival. He looked at Lila Mercer again. Really looked this time. Beneath the fine bones and sharp eyes, she was thinner than she should be. Her dress had been altered not for fashion, but for necessity. The trunks Jesse was hauling probably contained everything she owned, and it wasn't much. She needed this as much as he did, maybe more. The cabin's got 1 room, he said abruptly. I'll sleep in the barn until we can add on. Her posture shifted, some of the defensive tension easing. That's not necessary. It is. He met her eyes. This might be a practical arrangement, but I won't have you uncomfortable. We do this proper or not at all. For the first time, her expression softened, just slightly. Proper. After you nearly shot me and told me I'm too pretty for your taste. I didn't say pretty. You implied it. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Mr. Hale? The honest answer sat in his throat, heavy and impossible to speak. I meant you're the kind of woman men notice. The kind they talk about, the kind that draws attention. And I can't have that kind of attention here. Not again. But he couldn't say that without explaining why. And explaining why meant reopening wounds that had barely scabbed over. I meant complicated, he said instead. I asked for simple. You're not simple. No, Lila agreed. I'm not. But simple won't fix your fences or balance your books, or stand up when your neighbors try to push you off your own land. My neighbors… What? Ronan's attention sharpened. What did Jesse tell you? Nothing. I have eyes. She gestured toward the window again. Those fence lines didn't cut themselves. The burn marks in your south pasture aren't from a controlled burn. And a man doesn't answer his door with a rifle unless he's expecting trouble. Ronan felt the headache starting behind his eyes. You've been here 5 minutes, and I've already noticed what you're pretending isn't happening. She crossed her arms. So, do we have an arrangement or not? Because if we're going to do this, I'd prefer we start with honesty instead of whatever performance you're attempting. Outside, Jesse was making his way back to the wagon, clearly eager to escape whatever domestic drama was unfolding. Ronan almost envied him. The smart thing would be to send her back. Pay the compensation, eat the cost, find someone else. Someone who wouldn't
This
push.
story was posted
Someone
on the
who
channel
wouldn't see.
West of Betrayal.
But looking at Lila
Please
Mercer,
do not repost
at the
it
set of her
in any
jaw and the
form.
challenge in her eyes, Ronan knew finding someone else would just mean finding someone weaker. Someone who'd crumble when the pressure came. And the pressure would come. Marcus Voss, the neighboring rancher who wanted Ronan's water rights, had made that clear. "We marry today," Ronan said. "Reverend Hayes makes circuit rounds. He'll be in Timber Falls this afternoon. We go now, we can catch him." "Romantic," Lila said dryly. "You said you weren't burdened by romantic illusions." "I'm not, but I do have standards." She moved to one of her trunks and opened it, pulling out a dress that had been carefully folded in tissue paper. Deep green, simpler than her traveling clothes, but well made. "Give me 20 minutes to change. And Mr. Hale?" "What?" "If we're doing this, you call me Lila, not Miss Mercer, not ma'am. Lila." She paused. "And you should probably shave. You look like you've been living in that barn for months." 3 years, he muttered. Her eyes widened slightly. "You've been sleeping in the barn for 3 years? The cabin's for—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter." But he could see her filing that information away, adding it to whatever assessment she was building. This was exactly what he'd wanted to avoid. Someone who'd look too close, ask too many questions, piece together the story he'd worked so hard to bury. 20 minutes, he said, and walked out. The ride to Timber Falls took 90 minutes. They didn't speak much. Ronan drove the wagon with the kind of grim focus usually reserved for driving through blizzards, and Lila sat beside him in her green dress, hands folded, watching the landscape roll past. It was wild country, beautiful in a harsh way. Mountains rose to the west, their peaks already white with early snow. The valley floor spread gold with dying grass, cut through by creeks that would freeze solid in another month. Here and there, homesteads marked the slow crawl of civilization, a cabin, a barn, smoke rising from a chimney. "It's bigger than I expected," Lila said finally. "What is?" "The emptiness." She gestured at the expanse. "In Boston, you're never more than a street away from 100 people. Here, you could scream for help and no one would hear. That's the idea." She glanced at him. "For you, maybe. Some of us prefer knowing help is available. Help comes with costs. So does isolation." Ronan didn't answer that. The problem was she wasn't wrong. Isolation did have costs. He'd paid them daily for 3 years, in loneliness, in paranoia, in the slow erosion of anything resembling a normal life. But the alternative, trusting people, building connections, letting anyone get close enough to hurt him, the cost had already bankrupted him once. He wouldn't survive it twice. Timber Falls wasn't much of a town. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a smithy, and a handful of other buildings that served the scattered homesteaders. The church was actually just a large room above the general store that Reverend Hayes used when he passed through. Ronan tied the wagon outside Brennan's Mercantile. A few locals loitered on the porch, old Tom smoking his pipe, the Hendricks boys looking bored. They straightened when they saw Lila step down from the wagon. "Hail," Tom said, nodding. His eyes went to Lila, then back to Ronan, curiosity naked on his weathered face. "Didn't know you were expecting company." "I'm not." Ronan offered Lila his hand to help her down, because ignoring basic courtesy would just fuel more gossip. "This is Miss Lila Mercer. We're getting married." The silence that followed was profound. Then Tom's pipe nearly fell out of his mouth. "Married? You?" "That's generally what happens when someone orders a bride," Lila said pleasantly. "Or is it that shocking that someone agreed to marry him?" One of the Hendricks boys, Jake, the younger one, laughed before he could stop himself. Tom shot him a look, but the old man was grinning too. "Well, hell," Tom said. "Congratulations, I suppose. Didn't think you'd ever—" He stopped himself, glancing at Lila. "That is, we're real happy for you." "Thrilled, I'm sure." Ronan took Lila's elbow, steering her toward the steps. "Hayes upstairs?" "Should be. He was doing the Carlson's baby blessing earlier." Tom's grin widened. "You need witnesses?" "Happy to oblige." "We'll manage." But they did need witnesses, and by the time they reached the upstairs room, half the town seemed to have materialized. Word traveled fast in a small community, especially word as interesting as Ronan Hale is getting married to a woman who looks like that. Reverend Hayes was a lean man in his 50s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd married dozens of frontier couples under similar circumstances. He took in Ronan's tense shoulders and Lila's composed expression and didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Well," he said, "shall we begin?" The ceremony was brief. Hayes read from his worn Bible, asked the required questions, and didn't elaborate on the parts about love and cherishing. This was a contract, not a romance, and everyone in the room understood that. When it came time for Ronan to repeat his vows, his voice came out rougher than intended. "I, Ronan Hale, take you, Lila Mercer." He looked at her then, really looked. She was watching him with those sharp green eyes, no illusions in them, no softness, just a clear-eyed understanding that they were both making a choice born of necessity. To be my lawfully wedded wife. Lila's vows were steadier. She didn't stumble over the words, didn't hesitate. When Hayes pronounced them married, she accepted Ronan's brief, awkward kiss without flinching. "Well," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "That's done." "Yeah." "Do you regret it already?" He should. Every logical part of him said this was a mistake. But looking down at Lila, at his wife, strange as that word felt, Ronan found he didn't have a simple answer. "Ask me again in a month," he said. Her smile was small but real. "Fair enough." They bought supplies, flour, salt, coffee, lamp oil, and loaded them into the wagon while the town watched. Mrs. Brennan, who ran the mercantile with her husband, actually hugged Lila and whispered something that made her laugh. Whatever the older woman said, it eased some of the tension from Lila's shoulders. "She told me to keep a rolling pin handy," Lila said when they were back in the wagon, "in case you get difficult." Sound advice. "I thought so." She settled her skirts. "She also said you used to come to town more often, years ago." Ronan's hands tightened on the reins. "Did she?" "She said you were different then, easier. People change. Or they get hurt and decide not to risk it again." Lila's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "I'm not asking you to tell me everything, Ronan, but I need to know if I'm walking into danger, the kind that cuts fences and burns fields." He wanted to deflect, to tell her it was nothing, that he could handle it. But she'd called him on his bullshit once already today, and he was too tired to lie well. "Marcus Voss," he said, "runs the Triple V ranch north of here. He wants my water access. There's a creek that runs through both properties, but the best flow's on my side. He's been trying to buy me out for 2 years. And when you wouldn't sell? He got creative." Ronan guided the wagon onto the rutted road heading home. "Started small, cattle wandering onto my land, eating my grass, then fences getting cut, a fire in the south pasture that I barely caught in time. Nothing I can prove was him, but nothing I can ignore either. Have you gone to the law? The closest law is 3 days' ride. By the time a marshal got here, it'd be over." He paused. "Besides, Voss has money. Money buys influence, even out here. So you've just been enduring it. What else is there to do? Fight back?" She said it simply, as if it were obvious. "Find proof. Rally the other homesteaders. Make it too costly for him to continue. This isn't Boston, Lila. We don't have courts on every corner." "No, but you have neighbors. You have witnesses. You have—" She stopped, frowning. "You do have allies, don't you? Other ranchers who'd stand with you?" Ronan didn't answer immediately. The truth was, he'd isolated himself so thoroughly over the past 3 years that he wasn't sure who'd stand with him. After Thomas died, after the whispers about unnatural friendship and the way people's eyes had slid away when he came to town, Ronan had retreated, built walls, kept everyone at arm's length. It had seemed safer that way. "I'll take that silence as a no," Lila said. "I don't need allies. I just need to outlast him." "That's not a strategy, Ronan. That's just slow surrender." The words stung because they were true. He had been surrendering inch by inch, too beaten down by grief and anger to fight back properly. The ranch had become less a home and more a place to hide while he waited for something, anything, to change. Maybe that's why he'd finally written to Mrs. Havering.
This
Not
story
really for
was
help with the
posted on the
ranch,
channel
but
west
because
of
some part
Betrayal.
of him recognized
Please
that
do not
he was
repost
disappearing
it
into
in any
silence, and if he didn't do something, there'd be nothing left of him worth saving. I married you for practical help, he said finally, not strategic advice. Well, you're getting both. Lila's voice held a thread of amusement. Consider it a bonus. Despite himself, Ronan felt his mouth twitch towards something that might have been a smile. It felt strange, unfamiliar. You always this stubborn? Always. It's gotten me into considerable trouble over the years. I believe that. They fell into silence again, but it was different now, less hostile. The sun was starting to descend, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The temperature dropped with it. Autumn in Montana didn't linger. In another week or two, they'd wake to frost. In a month, snow. Ronan glanced at Lila, wondering if she understood what she'd signed up for. Winter on a frontier homestead wasn't romantic. It was isolation, cold, and the constant work of survival. No social calls, no entertainment beyond whatever you could create yourself. Just you and the person you'd married and the endless white landscape pressing in. If she couldn't handle it, if she cracked under the pressure or decided she'd made a mistake, he'd be worse off than before. Because now he'd have to deal with the failure of this too. Stop it, Lila said. He blinked. Stop what? Whatever you're thinking. I can feel you catastrophizing from here. She turned to look at him fully. I'm not going to run, Ronan. I'm not going to break. I'm not going to regret this and make your life miserable out of spite. I know what I agreed to. You don't, though. Not really. You can't know until you've lived it. Then I'll learn. She paused. And for what it's worth, I think you're doing the same thing, learning who I am instead of who you expected. That was fair. He had been expecting someone forgettable, someone he could relegate to the background of his life. Lila Mercer was going to be impossible to ignore. The ranch came into view as they crested the last hill. The cabin looked small and rough against the darkening sky, the barn a hulking shadow beside it. Ronan's chest tightened with a familiar mixture of pride and inadequacy. He'd built this. Every plank, every nail, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough to match the vision he'd started with. It's not much, he said. No, Lila agreed, but it's a start. The first night was awkward in the way all first nights are when two strangers try to share space. Ronan brought in Lila's trunks while she lit lamps and assessed the cabin's interior with the critical eye of someone mentally cataloging everything that needed fixing. The stove works? She asked. Yeah. Water source? Creek's 100 yards north. I've been meaning to dig a well closer. Meaning to? She opened cupboards, finding them mostly bare. We'll need a better storage system. And this floor. When's the last time it was properly cleaned? Ronan felt defensive heat crawl up his neck. I've been managing. I'm sure you have. But managing and thriving are different things. She turned to face him, and her expression gentled slightly. I'm not criticizing, Ronan. I'm planning. If I'm going to live here, I want it livable. Fine. Plan away. He grabbed a blanket from the chest. I'll be in the barn. Wait. She crossed to him, and for a moment he thought she might argue about the sleeping arrangements again, but instead she just said, Thank you. For what? For trying. I know this isn't easy for you. She paused. It's not easy for me either, but I think we can make it work, if we're honest with each other. Honest. The word felt like a trap. Honesty meant exposure, vulnerability, all the things he'd trained himself to avoid. I'll do my best, he said, which was the most he could offer. That's all I'm asking. He left before the conversation could go deeper. The barn was cold and smelled of hay and horses. Duke, his aging gelding, snorted a greeting from his stall. Ronan spread the blanket in the loft, lay down on the prickly hay, and stared at the rafters. What the hell had he done? Married a stranger, brought someone into his carefully controlled isolation, opened a door he'd thought he'd nailed shut, but as he lay there, listening to the wind pick up outside, Ronan couldn't quite bring himself to regret it. Lila was trouble, yes, complicated and sharp-edged and far too perceptive, but she was also here, present, real. And maybe, just maybe, that was what he'd needed all along. In the cabin, lamplight glowed through the window. He could see Lila's shadow moving around, unpacking, settling in, making the space hers. It should have felt like an invasion. Instead, it felt like something shifting, some frozen thing beginning to thaw. Ronan pulled the blanket tighter and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own problems. Marcus Voss wouldn't stop his harassment just because Ronan had married. The ranch still needed more work than one person could handle. Winter was coming, indifferent and brutal, but for the first time in 3 years, Ronan wasn't facing it alone. That had to count for something. He woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness, Ronan thought he'd imagined it. But no, the scent was real, drifting through the gaps in the barn walls. Someone was cooking. Lila, his wife. The word still felt strange. He'd been married less than 24 hours, and already his routine was disrupted. Ronan pulled on his boots and coat, scrubbed a hand through his hair, and headed for the cabin. Inside, Lila had transformed the space. Not dramatically, she'd only had a few hours, but enough to notice. The floor had been swept, the dishes washed and stacked, the table cleared of his scattered papers, now organized into neat piles. She stood at the stove, wearing a simple work dress and an apron, flipping something in a skillet. "You're up early," he said. She glanced over her shoulder. "So are you. I made coffee, and there were eggs, I assume from chickens I haven't met yet. 3 hens out back. They're temperamental." "Aren't we all?" She slid eggs onto 2 plates, added bread she must have made from the supplies they'd bought yesterday. "Sit, eat." It felt strange being given orders in his own cabin, but Ronan sat. The eggs were good, better than anything he'd cooked for himself in months. The coffee was strong and hot. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me for basic sustenance." But she smiled a little. "Though if you want to show appreciation, you could tell me the plan for today." "Plan?" "For the ranch, what needs doing first?" Ronan thought about the endless list of tasks. Fences, barn roof, well digging, bringing in the last of the hay before the weather turned, preparing the cabin for winter. All of it urgent, none of it manageable alone. "Fences," he said. "The ones Voss cut. I need to repair them before my cattle wander off." "Then we'll do that." "We?" She raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm going to sit inside and embroider? I told you I can work." "Fence repair isn't what? Suitable for a woman?" Her tone could have cut glass. "Ronan, I didn't travel 2,000 miles to be decorative. Either treat me like a partner, or we're going to have a very long, very unpleasant winter." He wanted to argue, wanted to say it wasn't about her being a woman, it was about keeping her safe, keeping her away from the kind of back-breaking labor that left you exhausted and bleeding and wondering why you bothered. But that would be a lie. He was trying to keep her at a distance, keep her in a box labeled wife, practical arrangement, where she couldn't disrupt the careful walls he'd built. She wasn't going to stay in that box. "Fine," he said, "but you follow my lead. And if I tell you to get back to the cabin, you don't argue. If there's danger, yes. Then I won't argue." She met his eyes. "But if you're just trying to protect my delicate sensibilities, I'll ignore you completely." "Noted." They finished breakfast in silence. Ronan found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The efficient way she moved, the unconscious grace in ordinary tasks. She'd pulled her dark hair back in a practical braid, and without the traveling dress and careful presentation, she looked younger. Maybe 25, he guessed. Old enough to have made hard choices, but young enough to still believe things could get better. He envied that, a little. The belief. Outside, the sun was breaking over the eastern ridge, painting the frost-rimmed grass in gold. The cattle were dark shapes in the pasture, grazing peacefully. For a moment, everything looked almost perfect. The kind of morning that made you forget about debts and threats and all the ways a life could fall apart. Then Ronan saw the fence. "Son of a bitch." Lila followed his gaze. Someone had come during the night and cut another section. 20 feet of wire snipped clean through, posts pulled from the ground and thrown aside. Fresh tracks led away north, toward Voss's property. "This is new?" Lila asked. "Since yesterday." Rage burned
This
cold
story
in
was
Ronan's
posted
chest.
on the channel
He
west
knew.
of Betrayal.
He knew I was in
Please
town.
do not
Knew
repost
the
it
place
in
was
any
empty.
form.
Or he's sending a message. She walked closer, examining the damage. "About your marriage. Making sure you know that having help won't change anything." She was right. This wasn't random vandalism. This was calculated. A reminder that Marcus Voss could reach Ronan's ranch whenever he wanted, could destroy what he'd built, could grind him down until selling seemed like relief instead of surrender. "We need proof," Lila said. "Something that ties this to Voss directly. Otherwise nothing." Ronan's voice came out flat. "Even with proof, there's no law close enough to help. He knows that. That's why he's bold." "Then we make him less bold." She turned to face him. "Fear works both ways, Ronan. He thinks you're alone and weak. Show him you're neither." "By doing what? Starting a range war?" "By standing your ground. By repairing this fence and setting watches and making it clear that intimidation won't work." Her eyes flashed. "And by finding out what he's really afraid of, because men like that, they're always afraid of something." Ronan wanted to dismiss it, wanted to say she didn't understand frontier justice, that idealism got people killed out here. But looking at her, at the steel in her spine and the intelligence in her eyes, he realized she might understand better than he wanted to admit. She'd survived something too. Maybe not the same thing, but something that had left her willing to marry a stranger and move to the edge of nowhere. Whatever softness she'd once had, life had burned it away, leaving someone harder and sharper behind. Someone a lot like him. "We'll fix the fence," he said. "Then we'll talk about watches." "And finding his weakness?" "One thing at a time, Lila." She smiled, and it was the dangerous smile again, the one that said she was 3 steps ahead and just waiting for him to catch up. "One thing at a time," she agreed. They spent the morning wrestling with wire and posts, rebuilding what had been destroyed. Lila proved surprisingly capable, strong enough to hold tension on the wire, while Ronan stapled it, smart enough to see the efficient way to space the posts. She didn't complain about the cold or the splinters or the wire that cut through gloves and drew blood. By noon, they had the section repaired. It wouldn't hold forever. Good fence work took time they didn't have, but it would keep the cattle in for now. Ronan straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the chill. His back ached, his hands were torn up, and Lila looked just as battered, her dress dirty and her braid coming loose. "You did good," he said. "So did you." She flexed her fingers, wincing. "Though I'm going to feel this tomorrow." "Welcome to ranching." They gathered the tools and started back toward the cabin. The sun was high now, burning off the morning frost. In better times, this would be when Ronan stopped for a meal and rest before tackling the afternoon work. But these weren't better times. "Someone's coming," Lila said quietly. Ronan followed her gaze. A rider approached from the north, moving at an easy pace. As he got closer, Ronan recognized the horse, a flashy chestnut that cost more than most homesteaders made in a year. Marcus Voss. "Get behind me," Ronan said, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle he'd left in the cabin. "No." Lila stayed exactly where she was, fence pliers still in her hand. "I'm your wife, not your property. We face this together." There wasn't time to argue. Marcus Voss was close enough now that Ronan could see his face, all charm and calculation, the kind of expression that made reasonable men sign away their futures. He was younger than Ronan by a few years, dressed too well for ranch work in a tailored coat and polished boots. Everything about him screamed money and the arrogance that came with it. He pulled up 20 feet away, making a show of surveying the repaired fence. "Hale, didn't expect to see you out here doing patchwork. Thought you'd given up on this place." "Still here," Ronan said. His voice came out level, but his jaw ached from clenching. "Still not selling." "So I see." Voss's eyes slid to Lila, and something predatory flickered in them. "And you've acquired a companion. How domestic." "My wife," Ronan corrected, stepping slightly in front of her despite her earlier protest. "Lila Hale." The name felt strange in his mouth, her new name tied to his, but it also felt like a claim, a line drawn. Voss heard it too, His smile thinned. Congratulations. Though I have to wonder what kind of woman agrees to marry a man with a failing ranch and a reputation for... He paused, letting the silence stretch. Well, let's just say the town has a long memory. Heat flooded Ronan's face, anger and shame twisting together. He knew exactly what Voss was implying. The whispers that had followed Thomas's death, the speculation about their friendship, the way people had looked at him like he was something unnatural. It had driven him into isolation, made him believe that keeping his distance was the only way to survive. And now Voss was weaponizing it. Careful, Lila said, her voice sharp as broken glass. You're about to say something you'll regret. Voss turned his attention fully to her, and Ronan saw the exact moment the man reassessed. Whatever he'd expected, some timid mail-order bride maybe, or someone too desperate to fight back, Lila wasn't it. I'm simply being neighborly, Voss said smoothly, making sure Mrs. Hale understands what she's gotten into. This land is hard, and your husband has made it harder by refusing reasonable offers. I'd hate to see you suffer for his stubbornness. How considerate. Lila's tone could have frozen whiskey. And was cutting our fence last night part of this neighborly concern? Or was that just standard intimidation? The mask slipped. Just for a second, Voss's expression went cold and ugly before smoothing back into false civility. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? She took a step forward, and Ronan resisted the urge to pull her back. Strange coincidence, then. We marry, leave town for a few hours, and return to find fresh damage. Almost like someone was watching, waiting. These things happen on the frontier, vandals, drifters, with very specific targets. Lila cut him off. Tell me, Mr. Voss, what exactly are you afraid of? That my husband might actually succeed? That he might prove you don't own this valley just because you want to? Voss's horse shifted, picking up on its rider's tension. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Ronan could hear his own heartbeat, feel the cold sweat on his back despite the chill. This was the moment things could go very bad very fast. Voss had men, money, influence. One word from him and, "You've got fire," Voss said finally, looking at Lila with something that might have been respect or might have been calculation. Shame it's wasted here. This ranch is dying, Mrs. Hale. Has been since Thomas Crawford put a bullet in his head 3 years ago and left your husband all alone. Ronan's vision went white at the edges. The grief and rage he'd buried so carefully erupted, and he was moving before conscious thought kicked in. 3 steps toward Voss, fists clenched, ready to drag the man off his horse and beat him bloody. Lila's hand caught his arm. Small, but her grip was iron. Don't, she said quietly. That's what he wants. She was right. Voss sat easy in his saddle, actually smiling now, waiting to see if Ronan would snap. If he did, if he attacked a wealthy landowner unprovoked, it would be the excuse Voss needed to bring real trouble. Sheriff, legal claims, maybe worse. Ronan stopped, breathed, let the red fade from his vision. Thomas's death was an accident, he said, and hated how his voice shook. The rifle misfired while he was cleaning it. That's what the inquest said. Of course it did. Voss gathered his reins. Well, I can see you're busy with your repairs. I'll leave you to it. But Mrs. Hale? He tipped his hat to Lila. My offer stands. Anytime your husband wants to be reasonable, I'm willing to pay fair market value for this property. Might be worth considering before winter sets in and things get truly difficult. He rode off without waiting for a response, back toward his own ranch with its sprawling acreage and sturdy buildings, and the kind of security that money bought. Ronan stood frozen, watching him go. His hands were shaking, his throat felt too tight. Everything Voss had said was designed to cut, to wound, to remind him of exactly how alone and vulnerable he was. And it had worked. Even with Lila beside him, even with the fence repaired and the small victory of standing his ground, Ronan felt like he was drowning. Ronan, Lila's voice cut through the spiral. Look at me. He did. Her face was pale but composed, those green eyes steady on his. What he said about Thomas, was it true? Did he kill himself? The question hit like a physical blow. Ronan wanted to lie, to deflect, to retreat into the silence that had protected him for 3 years. But Lila deserved better than that. She'd stood beside him, faced down Voss without flinching, and she'd earned honesty even if it hurt. "I don't know," he said roughly. "The rifle was
This
old,
story
prone
was
to
posted
jamming.
on the channel
Thomas was
west
always
of
careful with
Betrayal.
it. But the
Please
day
do
it
not
happened,
repost it in
he
any
stopped,
form."
the memory choking him. He'd been quiet, distant. Said he was tired of fighting the land, tired of people's judgment. I thought he meant the ranch. I didn't think that he might mean something permanent. Ronan nodded, not trusting his voice. Lila was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone was gentler than he expected. And people talked, made assumptions about why a man would be that despairing, about your friendship with him. "We were partners, built this place together from nothing, that's all." But even as he said it, Ronan knew how it sounded. Two men, living alone on a remote homestead, closer than brothers. In some places that was just frontier pragmatism. In others, it was cause for suspicion. "It doesn't matter what they thought," Lila said firmly. "What matters is that Voss is using your grief as a weapon, and we can't let him." "We?" The word came out bitter. "Lila, you've been here one day. You don't owe me. I'm your wife. That means your fights are my fights." She picked up the fence pliers she'd dropped. "Now come on. We've got work to finish, and I'll be damned if I let Marcus Voss think he can scare us off our own land." Something in Ronan's chest eased at the certainty in her voice. Not much, but enough to breathe again. Enough to pick up his tools and follow her back to work. They spent the rest of the afternoon in silence, finishing the fence repairs and moving on to other urgent tasks. Lila proved herself again and again, hauling water, mucking stalls, climbing into the barn loft to check for roof damage without being asked. She was competent in a way that suggested real experience, not just educated guesswork. As the sun started its descent toward the mountains, Ronan found himself watching her more than the work. The way she attacked each task methodically. The way she didn't waste motion or complain about the difficulty. She'd been raised in a city, she'd said, keeping house for her father's medical practice. That explained the efficiency, maybe, but not the lack of hesitation around livestock and rough labor. "You've done this before," he said, breaking the silence. "Ranch work." Lila glanced up from the chicken coop she was inspecting. "Not exactly, but my father's practice was in a poor neighborhood. I learned early that survival meant doing whatever needed doing, whether it was scrubbing floors or assisting with surgery or negotiating with landlords." She paused. "Pretending to be delicate gets you nowhere when you're trying to keep the lights on." "What happened to him? Your father?" Her expression closed off slightly. "He died 2 years ago. Pneumonia that turned into something worse. After that, his colleagues made it clear I wasn't welcome to continue managing the practice, and his debts were more than I could handle alone." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "So I had a choice. Find a husband who wanted a decorative wife and pretend to be something I'm not, or find someone who needed a partner and actually be useful. Mrs. Havering's service offered the latter. And you ended up with me." "Lucky me," she said dryly, but there was warmth underneath it. "Though I have to admit you're more complicated than advertised. Sorry to disappoint." "I didn't say I was disappointed." She met his eyes. "Just surprised. Your letter made you sound like someone who wanted to be left alone. But that's not really what you want, is it?" The observation landed too close to the truth. Ronan looked away, focusing on the fence line instead of her too perceptive gaze. "I want to keep this ranch. Everything else is secondary." "Is it?" Lila's voice was quiet. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to prove you don't need anyone, that you can survive on pure stubbornness, and that's not the same as actually wanting to be alone. You don't know me well enough to make that judgment? Maybe not, but I know loneliness when I see it." She turned back to the chicken coop. "I know what it's like to build walls so high you forget there's anything beyond them. And I know how easy it is to convince yourself that isolation is strength instead of just fear dressed up in different clothes." Ronan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, that his isolation had been necessary, protective, the only rational response to a world that had proven itself hostile. But the words stuck in his throat because some part of him recognized the truth in what she said. He had been afraid, still was, afraid of trusting someone and having them leave, afraid of being seen and found wanting, afraid that if he let anyone close, they'd discover all the broken pieces inside him and decide he wasn't worth the effort. Lila had been here 24 hours, and she'd already seen more than most people had in 3 years. "We should head in," he said, instead of addressing any of it. "Get food, rest. Tomorrow's going to be just as hard." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But Ronan? Eventually we're going to have to talk about this. About Voss, about Thomas, about what you're actually fighting for. Because I can't help if I don't understand." "I know. When you're ready, then." They walked back to the cabin together as dusk settled over the valley. The temperature was dropping fast. Ronan could see his breath in the fading light. Inside, Lila lit lamps while he built up the fire in the stove. The small space warmed quickly, and the smell of cooking Lila had put beans on to soak that morning filled the air. It felt almost domestic, almost normal, like maybe this arrangement could actually work. Then Ronan noticed Lila favoring her right hand, the one she'd torn up on the fence wire. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage she'd wrapped around it. "Let me see," he said. "It's fine." "Lila." She sighed but held out her hand. Ronan unwrapped the bandage carefully, revealing a deep cut across her palm that hadn't stopped bleeding properly. It needed stitches, but the nearest doctor was in Timber Falls and the light was already failing. "I can do it," Lila said, reading his expression. "I've sewn up my father's patients often enough. Just need needle and thread." "You're not stitching your own hand. Then you'll have to do it." She met his eyes, challenging him to argue. "Unless you'd rather ride 3 hours in the dark to fetch someone else." Ronan retrieved his sewing kit, basic supplies for mending tack and clothes, and poured whiskey over a needle to sterilize it. His hands were steadier than he expected as he threaded it, but his stomach turned at the thought of causing her more pain. "I've done this before," he said, though his voice sounded uncertain even to himself. "On animals, mostly. It won't be pretty." "I don't need pretty. I need functional." Lila held her hand steady, not flinching as he made the first stitch. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't make a sound. Working by lamplight, Ronan closed the wound with 6 careful stitches. His fingers were too large for delicate work, and he could feel her pulse hammering under her skin, but she stayed perfectly still. When he finished and wrapped it in clean cloth, she flexed her fingers experimentally. "Not bad," she said. "You might have a future in medicine if ranching doesn't work out." "Don't count on it." But he felt oddly pleased by the compliment. "You should rest it. No heavy lifting tomorrow." "We'll see." She stood, swaying slightly, and Ronan realized the blood loss and adrenaline crash were hitting her. "I should make dinner. I'll handle it. Sit down before you fall down." For once, she didn't argue. She sank into the chair by the stove, her face pale in the lamplight. Ronan heated the beans, added some of the bacon he'd been saving, made coffee strong enough to strip paint. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling. They ate in silence. Outside, night had fallen completely, bringing with it the absolute darkness of the frontier. No city lights, no neighbors, just the vast empty blackness and the stars burning cold overhead. Somewhere out there, Marcus Voss was probably sitting in his comfortable ranch house, confident that time and intimidation would eventually break Ronan's resistance. Let him think that. Let him underestimate what desperation and stubbornness could accomplish. "Tell me about the water rights," Lila said suddenly. "Why does Voss want them so badly?" Ronan set down his cup. "There's a creek that runs through both properties. Mine has the better flow, comes down from snowmelt in the mountains, stays strong most of the year. His section's downstream, gets less volume. In dry years, it makes a difference. And he could dig wells. He has. But the water table's deep on his land and wells are expensive. Easier to get control of the creek." Ronan paused. "When Thomas and I first staked this claim, Voss tried to buy us out, offered decent money too. But Thomas," his throat tightened, "Thomas wanted to build something permanent, prove we could make it work. So we refused, and Voss has been punishing you ever since." "Not right away. At first he tried legal challenges, claimed our survey was wrong, that we'd encroached on his land. When that failed, he got creative. Cattle wandering onto our fields, equipment going missing, little things that add up. Ronan's hands clenched around the cup. Then Thomas died, and I was alone. Voss probably figured I'd give up, sell out, leave. But you didn't. No. The word came out hard. This
story was posted on the channel
all I have
West of
left of what we
Betrayal.
built.
Please do not
Selling would
repost
feel
it
like
in any
admitting
form.
Thomas died for nothing. That everything we worked for was just a waste. Lila was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You know that's not rational, right? Keeping a failing ranch out of sentiment doesn't honor anyone's memory. It just grinds you down." The bluntness stung. "So I should give up? Let Voss win?" "I didn't say that." She leaned forward. "I said sentiment isn't enough. If you want to keep this place, you need better reasons. Practical ones. Strategic ones. Revenge, even. That I'd understand. But clinging to the past will only make you weak." "You don't understand." "I understand grief." Her voice went sharp. "I understand wanting to preserve something because letting go feels like betrayal. But my father's death taught me that the dead don't care what we do with what they left behind. They're gone. We're the ones who have to live with our choices." The words hit like a slap. Ronan wanted to be angry, to tell her she had no right to judge his mourning, but underneath the defensive reaction, he recognized the truth. He had been clinging to the past, using Thomas's memory as an excuse to stay frozen, not moving forward, not moving back, just existing in a kind of limbo. "So what do you suggest?" he asked roughly. "We make this ranch succeed, not for Thomas's memory, but because it's ours now. Because Voss is trying to take it, and I'll be damned if I let some arrogant rancher with too much money push us around." She met his eyes. "And because spite is an excellent motivator." Despite everything, Ronan felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "Spite. Spite," she confirmed. "It's gotten me through worse than this." "I believe that." The tension eased slightly. Ronan poured more coffee, and they sat in companionable silence for a while. The fire crackled. Wind rattled the shutters. Outside, a coyote called, lonely and distant. "You should take the bed," Ronan said eventually. "I'll stay in the barn." "We've been over this. It's not necessary." "It is for me." He stood, gathering his coat. I can't." The words tangled. How to explain that sharing space, sharing intimacy, even in the most basic form, felt impossible right now. That he needed distance to breathe, to think, to maintain the walls that were already crumbling faster than he could repair them? Lila studied him, and he braced for argument, but instead she just nodded. "All right. But Ronan, those walls you're building, they won't protect you forever. Eventually you'll have to let someone in." "Maybe." He moved toward the door, "but not tonight." Outside, the cold bit through his coat immediately. Ronan made his way to the barn, lit a lantern, and climbed into the loft. The horses shifted below, their presence oddly comforting. Up here, surrounded by hay and leather and the familiar smells of his work, he could almost pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Lila's presence had altered the ranch's rhythm, disrupted his careful isolation, forced him to confront things he'd been avoiding. And despite his resistance, despite the fear that came with opening up even slightly, part of him was grateful. Because she was right. The walls weren't protecting him. They were just keeping him trapped. Ronan lay back in the hay, staring at the barn rafters. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges. Voss wouldn't stop his harassment. The ranch still needed more repairs than they could manage. Winter was coming, and they weren't remotely prepared. But for the first time in 3 years, those problems didn't feel insurmountable. Not because they'd gotten easier, but because he wasn't facing them alone anymore. He could hear Lila moving around in the cabin, her shadow passing by the window as she prepared for bed. His wife. The word still felt foreign, but maybe with time it would start to feel real. Maybe. Dawn came too early and too cold. Ronan woke to frost on the inside of the barn walls and his breath visible in the air. His body ached from sleeping on hay, and his hands were stiff from yesterday's work. He'd slept poorly, jerking awake at every sound, half convinced that Voss would return with worse than cut fences. But the ranch was quiet, undisturbed. He fed the horses and chickens before heading to the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney. Lila was already up. When he pushed open the door, the warmth hit him like a wall, along with the smell of frying bacon. Coffee's ready, she said without turning from the stove. And before you ask, yes, my hand is fine. Hurts, but it's functional. Ronan poured coffee and sat, watching her work. She moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice, no wasted motion. Her braid was coming loose, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept much better than he had. We need to set watches, she said, sliding food onto plates. If Voss is going to keep coming at night, we can't leave the ranch undefended. I've been thinking about that. Ronan accepted the plate. Problem is, there's only 2 of us. Can't watch everything at once. Then we prioritize. The fences closest to his property, the barn, maybe set some kind of alarm, tripwires with bells, something that'll make noise if someone crosses. That might work? He was impressed despite himself. You've thought about this. I spent most of last night thinking about it. She sat across from him. Along with how we're going to make it through winter if we're spending all our energy on defense instead of preparation. We'll manage. Will we? She fixed him with that sharp green gaze. Ronan, I've been taking inventory. Your food stores are inadequate. Your firewood supply won't last past January. The cabin has gaps in the walls that'll let in cold air. The barn roof is one good snowstorm away from collapse, and we're spending time and resources repairing sabotage instead of addressing any of it. Every word was true, and every word made him feel like a failure. I know it's not enough. I've been doing what I can. I'm not criticizing. I'm stating facts. Her tone gentled slightly. But we need help, real help. We can't do this alone. You said it yourself yesterday. I don't have allies. Then we find some, or make them. She leaned forward. There are other homesteaders in this valley, right? People who've probably dealt with Voss's intimidation tactics? What if we brought them together, showed them there's strength in numbers? Ronan shook his head. Most of them have already sold to Voss or moved on. The ones left are barely holding on themselves. So they know exactly what we're going through. They know what it's like to be pushed around by someone with more money and power. Her eyes lit with something fierce. That's not weakness, Ronan. That's common cause. You're talking about organizing them against Voss. I'm talking about community, mutual defense, the kind of thing that happens naturally when people realize they're all facing the same enemy. It was a nice idea, in theory. But Ronan had seen communities fracture under pressure, had watched neighbors turn on each other when times got hard. After Thomas died, after the whispers started, he'd learned exactly how conditional frontier solidarity could be. They won't help, he said flatly. Not me. Not after... He stopped. After what? When he didn't answer, Lila's expression hardened. After the rumors about you and Thomas? After people decided that your grief was suspicious? Ronan, if you let their judgment isolate you, then Voss has already won. He doesn't have to destroy your ranch. You're doing it yourself. The accusation landed like a punch. Ronan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You don't know what it's like, being looked at like you're something wrong, something unnatural, having people whisper when you walk by, having them avoid you. You're right. I don't know what that specific experience is like. Lila stood too, facing him across the table. But I know what it's like to be judged for things I can't control. To have doors slammed in my face because I'm a woman in a man's profession. To be told I should be grateful for scraps instead of demanding what I've earned. Her voice shook slightly. So don't you dare tell me I don't understand persecution. I just refuse to let it win. They stared at each other, both breathing hard. The cabin felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. Ronan wanted to retreat, to walk away before this conversation went any deeper, but Lila's words echoed in his head. If you let their judgment isolate you, Voss has already won, and he couldn't quite escape the truth in them. I don't know how to do what you're asking, he said finally. I don't know how to face those people again and ask for help. Then I'll do it. She said it simply, like it was obvious. I'll go to Timber Falls, talk to the other homesteaders, make the case. You don't have to bare your soul to anyone. You just have to be willing to accept help when it's offered. And if they refuse, then we're no worse off than we are now. She moved around the table, stopping just in front of him. But Ronan, we have to try, because this... She gestured at the cabin, the ranch beyond. This isn't sustainable. You've been surviving, barely. It's time to do more than that. He wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons her plan wouldn't work, all the ways it could backfire. But looking at her, at the determination in her eyes and the set of her jaw, Ronan found
This
himself
story was
believing just
posted on the
slightly
channel
that
west
maybe she
of
was
Betrayal.
right.
Please
Maybe
do not
survival
repost
wasn't
it
enough
in any
anymore.
form.
All right, he said. We'll try it your way. But if it falls apart, then we figure out plan B. Lila's smile was small but real. Together, the word settled between them, strange and significant. Together. Partners. Not just two people sharing space out of necessity, but actually working towards something. It terrified him. It also felt like the first solid ground he'd stood on in 3 years. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Ronan strung tripwires along the fence lines, while Lila inventoried every scrap of food and supply they had, her neat handwriting filling pages with calculations that made their situation look even bleaker on paper. At night, they took turns keeping watch. 2 hours on, 4 hours off, neither of them sleeping well even during their rest periods. The exhaustion was building, wearing them down in ways that physical labor never quite managed. On the third morning, Lila announced she was riding to Timber Falls. Alone? Ronan looked up from the fence post he'd been setting. That's not safe. Safer than leaving the ranch undefended with both of us gone. She was already dressed for travel, her hair pinned up severe and practical. Besides, I'm less likely to be seen as a threat. Just a new bride making social calls, getting to know the neighbors. Voss isn't stupid. He'll know what you're doing. Let him know. She checked the small pistol she'd produced from somewhere in her belongings. Ronan had been surprised to discover she owned one, less surprised to learn she knew how to use it. I'm not going to hide what we're trying to do. That just makes us look weak. Ronan wanted to argue, to insist on coming with her, but she was right about leaving the ranch unguarded. And if he was being honest, the idea of facing the townspeople again made his stomach turn. Better to let Lila handle it, at least for now. Be careful, he said instead. And if anyone gives you trouble, I'll handle it. She swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, another skill she apparently possessed. Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone. No confrontations with Voss, no heroic fence repairs that leave you vulnerable. Yes, ma'am. She smiled at that, quick and genuine, then rode out. Ronan watched until she disappeared over the ridge, then forced himself back to work. The ranch didn't care about his worry. The chores still needed doing. He was hauling water when he heard the horses, multiple riders coming from the north. Ronan dropped the buckets and ran for the cabin, grabbing his rifle from the rack and positioning himself by the window where he had a clear view of the approach. 3 men. Not Voss himself, but ranch hands wearing the Triple V brand. They rode right up to the cabin like they owned the place, spreading out in a loose semicircle that blocked any easy escape. Ronan recognized the one in front, Carl Davis, Voss's foreman. Big man, competent, the kind who'd follow orders without asking too many questions about legality or ethics. Hail, Davis called out. We know you're in there. Come on out. Boss wants to talk. Ronan stayed put. Tell your boss if he wants to talk, he can come himself and make an appointment like civilized people. See, that's the problem. You're not being civilized. Boss made you a fair offer. You spit in his face. That's not neighborly. Neither is cutting my fences in the middle of the night. Davis's expression didn't change. Don't know what you're talking about, but I do know you're sitting on land that's more trouble than it's worth. Smart man would take the money and move on. Find somewhere easier, somewhere you're not. He paused, and his smile turned ugly. Somewhere people don't remember your particular history. The threat was clear. Ronan's grip tightened on the rifle. Get off my property. Or what? You'll shoot 3 men in broad daylight? That'd be murder, Hale. We're just here to deliver a message. Message delivered. Now leave. Instead, one of the other men, younger, meaner looking, dismounted and walked toward the fence line. Ronan tracked him with the rifle barrel, his heart hammering. This was it. The moment things escalated from intimidation to actual violence, the young cowhand pulled wire cutters from his belt. Don't, Ronan said, his voice hard. Or what? The kid grinned, drunk on the power of numbers. You gonna shoot me over some fence wire? He cut the first line. The wire sang as it parted, curling back on itself. Then the second line. The third. Ronan fired a warning shot into the dirt 2 feet from the kid's boots. The crack of the rifle echoed across the valley, and the horses spooked, dancing sideways. The young cowhand stumbled back, eyes wide, suddenly realizing that maybe Ronan wasn't bluffing. "Next one goes through your leg," Ronan said. His hands were steady now, all fear burned away by cold rage. "Then we'll see if your boss thinks this was worth it." Davis raised a hand, stopping his man from doing anything stupid. "Easy now. No call for shooting. We're leaving." He gathered his reins, but his eyes stayed on the cabin. "But you should know, boss ain't patient. He's given you plenty of chances to do this the easy way. You keep refusing. Things are going to get harder. For you. And that pretty wife of yours." The mention of Lila sent ice through Ronan's veins. "You threaten her? I'll kill you myself. And your boss. I don't care what it costs." "That's not a threat, Hale. That's friendly advice." Davis smiled. "Women shouldn't be out riding alone in wild country. All sorts of accidents can happen." They rode off slowly, taking their time, making sure Ronan understood they weren't afraid of him, that they could come back whenever they wanted. When they were finally out of sight, Ronan sagged against the window frame, his legs suddenly weak. The rifle slipped from his grip. He'd come within a heartbeat of killing a man over fence wire, and the scary part was how easy it had felt. How natural. That's what this place did to you. Stripped away civilization, left only survival instinct and rage. He needed to find Lila, make sure she was safe. But leaving the ranch now would be exactly what Voss wanted, to catch him away from home, vulnerable. And Lila had made him promise not to do anything stupid. So Ronan did the hardest thing he could imagine. He stayed. He repaired the fence they'd cut, again, and waited for his wife to come home. She didn't return until late afternoon, and when she did, she wasn't alone. Ronan heard the wagon before he saw it, the creak of wheels and jingle of harness. He grabbed the rifle again, positioned himself in the cabin doorway, then lowered it when he recognized the driver, Jesse Crawford, the supply wagon man with Lila sitting beside him. And in the back, 3 other people. "Easy there," Jesse called out, seeing the rifle. "We're friendly." Lila climbed down, her face tired but triumphant. "We have allies." The 3 in the wagon bed were the Brennans, Mrs. Brennan from the Mercantile, her husband William, and their teenage son Michael. They looked uncertain, eyeing the ranch and Ronan with equal wariness. "Mrs. Hale convinced us to hear you out," William Brennan said. He was a solid man in his 50s, weathered by frontier life. "Said you were organizing against Voss's land grabs." "She said more than that," Mrs. Brennan added, climbing down with her husband's help. "She said you were willing to fight, that you'd already stood up to him once and weren't backing down." Her sharp eyes assessed Ronan. "That true?" Ronan glanced at Lila, who gave him a subtle nod. "It's true. Voss wants my water rights. I won't sell, so he's been making my life difficult." "Difficult how?" William asked. "Cut fences, burned pasture, threats." Ronan hesitated, then added, "His men were here today while Lila was gone. Cut more fence, told me things would get worse if I didn't cooperate." The Brennans exchanged looks. Mrs. Brennan's expression hardened. "He did the same to the Carlsons last year, made their lives hell until they sold for half what the land was worth. Then the Hendersons. Then the McCormicks." "We thought about leaving too," William admitted. "Our store's barely profitable. Voss could ruin us with one bad word to his hands. They're half our business. But your wife made a good point. Where do we run to? How many times do we let bullies push us around before we stand? So you're willing to help?" Ronan couldn't quite believe it. After 3 years of isolation, after convincing himself nobody would stand with him, here were people actually offering. "We're willing to listen," Mrs. Brennan corrected. "Your wife's got ideas, but we need to hear the full plan before we commit to anything." They gathered in the cabin, cramped with 6 people, but nobody complained. Lila spread papers across the table, the notes she'd been making. Jesse stayed by the door, quiet, but present. "Here's what we know," Lila began, her voice steady and confident. "Voss has been systematically buying up small homesteads in this valley for the past 3 years. He's used intimidation, legal pressure, and in some cases outright sabotage to force people out. The marshal's office is too far away to help, and Voss has enough money to make legal challenges expensive and drawn out. So how do we fight that? Michael Brennan asked. The kid was maybe 17, eager in the way young men get when they smell adventure. We don't have money or legal connections.
This story was
No,
posted on the
Lila
channel
agreed.
west of
But we have
Betrayal.
numbers.
Please
and
do
we
not
have
repost
information.
it in any form.
She pointed to a crude map she'd drawn. Look at the pattern of his acquisitions. He's not buying randomly. He's creating a corridor from his main ranch house all the way to the rail line that's planned to come through in 2 years. Ronan leaned forward, studying the map. She was right. The properties Voss had bought formed a clear path. He's positioning himself to control all the land between the railroad and the mountain passes. Anyone wanting to ship cattle or goods would have to go through his property, pay his fees. Exactly. Lila's eyes gleamed. It's a brilliant strategy if you're willing to destroy people's lives to accomplish it. But it also means he's overextended. He's purchased at least a dozen properties in 3 years, plus he's running his own ranch. That's a lot of debt, a lot of overhead. You think he's in financial trouble? Mrs. Brennan asked. I think he's leveraged everything on this plan working, on the railroad coming through, on land values increasing, on being the only option for transport. Lila tapped the map. What if we made sure he wasn't the only option? William scratched his jaw. How? Alternative routes. If we can establish our own corridor connecting the remaining independent homesteads, creating access points that bypass Voss's land, then his monopoly breaks. His property becomes less valuable. His debt becomes a problem instead of an investment. The plan was audacious, and it would require cooperation from multiple homesteaders who'd spent years looking out for only themselves. Ronan could see the doubt on the Brennans' faces. That's a long-term strategy, William said carefully. What about the short term? Voss isn't going to wait 2 years. He'll keep attacking, keep pushing. Then we push back. Lila's voice went hard. We document everything, every cut fence, every threat, every act of sabotage. We create a record that even a distant marshal can't ignore, and we make it clear that we're organized, that attacking one of us means facing all of us. You're talking about range war, Jesse said from the doorway. That gets ugly fast. I'm talking about defense. Lila met his eyes. And yes, it might get ugly, but what's the alternative? Keep letting Voss pick us off one by one until he owns the entire valley? Silence fell. Ronan watched the others process what Lila was proposing. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it was also the first real strategy anyone had offered beyond endure and hope. I'm in, Mrs. Brennan said suddenly. William and I didn't build that store from nothing just to watch some rich man steal the valley. You want to organize, I'll help. Mary, William started. Don't you marry me. She turned to her husband. You know I'm right. We've been waiting for someone to stand up. Well, here they are. Either we help or we're cowards. William sighed, but there was a hint of a smile. When you put it that way. He looked at Ronan and Lila. All right, we're in. What do you need? The relief that flooded through Ronan was almost overwhelming. He'd been alone so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have people on his side. Witnesses, he said. When Voss's men come again, and they will, I need people who can testify that it wasn't random vandalism, that it's a pattern. I can do that, Jesse offered. My route takes me past most homesteads. I see things, hear things. Happy to start writing it down official-like. We'll need more people, Lila said. The Carlsons still live in the area, right? Even though they sold their land? And the Hendricks family? They might be willing to talk, Mrs. Brennan said, especially if they know they're not alone. They talked for another hour, hammering out details. Who would approach which families? How to document incidents? What to do if Voss escalated to actual violence? It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was something. A framework. A beginning. As the sun started setting and the Brennans prepared to leave, Michael pulled Ronan aside. My pa didn't say it, but I will. We heard the talk about you, about your friend who died. Some people said... He stopped, awkward. Well, they said things. But Mrs. Hale, she told us straight that you were just a man trying to keep his ranch. and that the past didn't matter as much as what you were willing to do now. Ronan's throat tightened. She said that? She did. And she said anyone who had a problem with you would have a problem with her. She's fierce, your wife. You're lucky. I know, Ronan said, and meant it. After the Brennans left, after Jesse drove his wagon back toward town, Ronan found Lila standing by the fence line, staring north toward where Voss's ranch lay hidden beyond the ridges. The sunset painted her in shades of gold and shadow. Thank you, he said. She turned, surprised. For what? For defending me. For getting them to come here. For... He gestured helplessly. For all of it. You don't need to thank me. This is my fight too now. She paused. Though I should tell you, it wasn't easy. Mrs. Brennan asked me point blank if the rumors were true. If you and Thomas had been... She stopped. What did you say? I said I didn't know and didn't care. That whatever you'd shared with Thomas was between you and him and had nothing to do with whether you deserved to keep your land. Lila met his eyes. Was that the wrong answer? No. Ronan's voice came out rough. It was honest, which is more than most people managed. Do you want to tell me about Thomas? The question hung in the cold air between them. Ronan's instinct was to deflect, to change the subject, to retreat into the safety of silence. But Lila had earned honesty. She'd fought for him, defended him to strangers, built a strategy to save the ranch when he'd been ready to just endure until he broke. We were friends, he said slowly. Met in Denver, both looking to stake claims, decided to partner up because neither of us had much capital alone. We worked well together. He was good with planning, I was good with building. We talked about expanding, maybe running 100 head of cattle eventually, making something that would last. He paused, memory rising sharp and painful. People talked from the start. 2 men, no wives, living alone. But we ignored it mostly. Figured if we worked hard enough, proved ourselves solid citizens, the gossip would die down. But it didn't. No. It got worse, especially after Thomas started getting... Ronan struggled for the word. Melancholy, I guess. He'd have spells where everything felt pointless, where he'd talk about how the land was cursed, how we'd never succeed. I thought it was just exhaustion. The ranch was hard on both of us. But you think now it was more than that. I think he was drowning, and I didn't see it. The admission hurt. The day he died, he'd been quiet all morning. I was out mending fence and heard the shot. By the time I got back, his voice broke. He was already gone, rifle beside him, like he'd been cleaning it and it went off. But the angle was wrong. Anyone with sense could see that. The inquest ruled it an accident anyway. Because the alternative was admitting one of us might have... Ronan couldn't finish the sentence. And if Thomas had done it deliberately, people would want to know why. And they'd come up with their own answers. Answers that implicated me. Easier to call it an accident and let me bury him. Lila was quiet for a long moment. Do you think he did it deliberately? I don't know. Some days I'm sure the rifle just misfired. Other days I remember things he said, looks he gave me, and I wonder if I missed all the signs. Ronan's hands clenched. Either way, I failed him. If it was an accident, I should have checked that rifle, made sure it was maintained. If it wasn't, I should have seen he was struggling, should have done something. Or maybe Thomas made his own choice, and you're not responsible for that. Lila's voice was gentle but firm. You can't control other people's despair, Ronan. You can't fix everything just by trying hard enough. Doesn't stop it from hurting. No, but it does mean you're allowed to move forward without guilt. She stepped closer. You've been punishing yourself for 3 years, living in the barn, isolating yourself, refusing to build anything new because you're afraid it'll fall apart like everything else did. But that's not living. That's just a slower kind of dying. The words hit like physical blows, each one landing on wounds he'd thought scarred over. I don't know how to do anything else. You learn. She reached out, hesitated, then took his hand. Her palm was warm against his, the stitches rough under his fingers. You let people help. You take risks again, even knowing they might fail. You decide that building something worth having is worth the possibility of losing it. Ronan looked down at their joined hands. It was the first time she'd touched him voluntarily since they'd married, the first physical connection that wasn't necessary for some practical task. It should have felt threatening, like she was pushing past his boundaries. Instead, it felt like an anchor, something solid to hold on to. "I'll try," he said. "Can't promise it'll work, but
This
I'll try."
story was posted on the
That's all I'm
channel
asking.
west of Betrayal.
They stood there
Please
as
do not
twilight deepened
repost
into
it
night,
in any
hands
form.
linked, watching the stars emerge. In the distance, a wolf howled. Closer, the cattle lowed as they settled for the night. The ranch breathed around them, alive despite everything trying to kill it. "Ronan?" Lila said quietly. "Yeah?" "Voss's men threatened me today when I was riding back from town. Ice flooded his veins." "What happened?" "Two of them blocked the road about a mile from here. Told me it wasn't safe for a woman to ride alone. That accidents happened all the time in wild country." Her hand tightened on his. "I pulled my pistol and told them if anyone had an accident, it would be them. Then I rode around them and didn't look back." Fury and terror warred in Ronan's chest. "You should have told me immediately." "I'm telling you now, and I'm telling you because you need to understand. This isn't going to stop with intimidation. Voss is escalating. The more we organize, the more we push back, the more dangerous he's going to get." "Then maybe we shouldn't—" "Don't." She cut him off. "Don't you dare say we shouldn't fight. Not after what we've started. Not after the Brennans agreed to help. We're committed now, Ronan. All the way. People could get hurt. You could get hurt. I could also get hurt doing nothing. At least this way, we're fighting for something that matters." She turned to face him fully. "But I need to know you're with me. Really with me. Not just going along because you're too tired to argue." Ronan looked at her. Really looked. At the determination in her face, the fire in her eyes, the absolute refusal to back down. She'd come to Montana as a stranger seeking practical security and somehow transformed into a warrior ready to go to war over a struggling ranch and a broken man. She was extraordinary. And she was his wife. "I'm with you," he said. "Whatever comes." "Good." She released his hand, but the warmth of her touch lingered. "Because I have a feeling things are about to get much worse before they get better." She was right, of course. The next morning brought proof. They woke to smoke. Not the friendly smoke of breakfast fires, but the thick, acrid smell of something large burning. Ronan bolted from the barn to find Lila already outside, staring south with horror on her face. The hay barn was ablaze. Not the main barn. Someone had been strategic enough to avoid killing the horses, but the smaller structure where they'd stored the winter hay. Months of work, precious feed they couldn't replace before the snow came, all going up in flames. Ronan ran for the well, started hauling water, but it was hopeless. The fire had too much of a head start, and they didn't have enough hands or buckets to fight it. All they could do was watch it burn and make sure sparks didn't catch the main barn or cabin. By the time the flames died down, dawn was breaking and the hay barn was gone. Just a smoking skeleton of charred timber and ash. "This is war," Lila said, her voice shaking with rage. "He's not even pretending anymore." Ronan surveyed the damage, calculating in his head. The hay represented their ability to keep the cattle alive through winter. Without it, they'd have to sell half the herd at whatever price they could get, or watch them starve. Either way, the ranch's future was crippled. "We need proof," he said. "Jesse's starting his rounds today, right? We get him here, document this, make it official. And then what? Wait for Voss to burn the rest?" Lila's hands were clenched into fists. "No. We hit back. Tonight." "Lila, I'm not talking about violence.
This
I'm
story
talking
was
about
posted on the
information."
channel west
Her
of
eyes met
Betrayal.
his.
Please
"You
do
said
not
Voss is
repost it in
leveraged
any
on his
form.
plan working, that he's in debt. Where would he keep those records? His ranch house? Probably. But we can't just... Why not?" She was already thinking, planning, her mind racing ahead. "If we can find proof of his financial situation, proof of how desperate he is, we can use it. Show the other homesteaders that he's vulnerable. Maybe even show a bank that he's overextended." It was insane. Breaking into Voss's ranch house would be suicide if they got caught, but it was also the kind of bold move that might actually work, because Voss would never expect them to be that aggressive. "We'd need to be smart about it," Ronan said slowly. "Wait until he's gone. Make sure his hands are occupied." There's a cattle auction in Billings next week. Mrs. Brennan mentioned it. Voss always goes, uses it to show off his stock, make deals. Lila's eyes gleamed. That's our window. You're serious about this. Deadly serious, she gestured at the smoking ruins. He's trying to starve us out, Ronan. We either fight back, or we lose everything. Looking at her, at his wife who'd arrived less than a week ago, and was now planning ranch raids like a seasoned outlaw, Ronan felt something shift in his chest. Not just gratitude or respect, but something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to what he'd been avoiding for 3 years. All right, he said, we'll do it. But we plan carefully. No mistakes. Lila smiled, fierce and beautiful in the morning light. No mistakes. They had 7 days to prepare, 7 days to gather intelligence on Voss's routines, to plan their approach, to make sure they had an exit strategy if everything went wrong, and 7 days to figure out how to survive the winter with half their hay gone and Voss's next attack surely coming. It should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt like the first time in 3 years that Ronan was actually fighting instead of just enduring. And despite the fear, despite the danger, despite everything rational telling him to back down, he was ready. Those 7 days crawled past with agonizing slowness. Every morning, Ronan woke expecting to find new damage, new fires, new threats. But Voss stayed quiet, which was somehow worse than the attacks. The silence felt calculated, like a cat waiting for the mouse to relax before pouncing. The homesteaders came, though. First the Brennans again, bringing supplies they couldn't afford to spare but insisted on sharing. Then the Carlsons, who'd sold their land to Voss but still lived nearby and harbored enough resentment to want revenge. Jesse Crawford became a regular presence, documenting everything with his careful handwriting and providing intelligence on Voss's movements. By the 5th day, they had 8 families committed to their alliance. Not enough to match Voss's resources, but enough to make him think twice about easy targets. He'll hit someone else next, Mrs. Carlson predicted. She was a hard woman in her 40s, worn down by frontier life, but not broken. That's what he does. Makes an example out of whoever he thinks is weakest. Then we make sure nobody's alone, Lila said. They'd gathered at the Brennan's store after hours, crowded into the back room where William kept his account books. Watches in pairs, routes between homesteads so we can raise alarm if needed. He wants to isolate us. We do the opposite. And the raid? Tom Henderson asked. He was young, maybe 30, with a wife and 2 small children. His farm bordered Voss's southern pasture. You still planning that? Yes. Ronan met the man's eyes. But only Lila and I go. If we're caught, the rest of you have deniability. You didn't know, couldn't have stopped us. That's a hell of a risk for 2 people. Better 2 than 8. Lila's voice was firm. We need those financial records. If Voss is as over-leveraged as we think, it's the only weapon we have that might actually stop him. The group murmured agreement, though Ronan could see the worry on their faces. They were farmers and shopkeepers, not outlaws. The fact that they were even considering this showed how desperate things had become. After the meeting, as they rode back to the ranch in darkness, Lila said, "You don't have to do this, you know. I can go alone." Not a chance. Ronan kept his eyes on the road, watching for movement in the shadows. We're partners, remember? That means we take the risks together. Even stupid ones? Especially stupid ones. He glanced at her. Though, for what it's worth, I don't think this is entirely stupid. Dangerous, yes, but Voss needs to learn he's not the only one who can strike first. Spoken like a man who's finally stopped just defending. There was approval in her voice. You're changing, Ronan, getting harder. Is that good or bad? Depends on whether we survive. She smiled in the darkness. Ask me again in a week. The night before the Billings auction, they finalized their plan. Jesse had confirmed Voss would be gone for at least 2 days, the trip there and back, plus the auction itself. Most of his hands would go with him, leaving only a skeleton crew at the ranch house. 3 men, Jesse reported. Davis stayed behind to manage things, plus 2 others. They rotate watches, but they're sloppy about it. Figure nobody's stupid enough to come at them directly. Good. Lila spread a rough map across the table. She'd drawn it from Jesse's descriptions and her own observations during a social call she'd made to a nearby homestead. The main house has a study on the first floor, east side. That's where Voss keeps his business records. Windows face the courtyard, which is exposed, but there's a kitchen entrance on the north side that the staff uses. Staff he took to Billings.
This story
Ronan
was
said.
posted
The
on the
cook,
channel
the
west of
housekeeper,
Betrayal.
they're all traveling
Please
with
do
him
not
to handle the
repost it
accommodations.
in any form.
So the house should be mostly empty except for the 3 guards. Lila tapped the map. We go in midnight when they're changing watch. That's when they're least alert. And if we're wrong, if there are more men or they catch us, then we run, fast. She met his eyes. But we won't get caught. We're smarter than they think we are. Ronan wanted to believe that. Wanted to trust in Lila's confidence and planning. But he'd seen enough go wrong in his life to know that even good plans fell apart under pressure. I need you to promise me something, he said. What? If this goes bad, if we're caught and they have guns on us, you run. You don't try to be heroic. You don't try to negotiate. You run and you don't look back. Lila's expression hardened. I'm not leaving you. You have to. One of us in Voss's custody is bad. Both of us gives him all the leverage. Ronan's throat tightened. Promise me, Lila. No. She stood, facing him across the small cabin. I won't promise that because I won't do it. We go in together, we come out together. That's the deal. That's not rational. I don't care. Her voice shook slightly. You think I came all this way, married a stranger, fought to build something here, just to abandon you when things get hard? That's not who I am, Ronan. And if you don't know that by now, you haven't been paying attention. The words hit him square in the chest, looking at her, at the fierce determination in her face, the absolute refusal to back down. Ronan realized she meant every word. She wouldn't run, wouldn't save herself at his expense. Whether that made her brave or foolish, he couldn't decide. Maybe both. All right, he said quietly. Together. Together, she repeated, and something passed between them. An understanding that went beyond partnership, beyond practical arrangement. They were in this completely, both of them, and whatever happened next would happen to them both. That should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground he'd stood on since Thomas died. They left the ranch at sunset the next day, telling the Brennans they were checking fence lines on the far pasture. The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary. The fewer people who knew the truth, the safer everyone was. The ride to Voss's ranch took 3 hours through rough country. They moved carefully, avoiding the main trails, using the darkness and their knowledge of the terrain to stay hidden. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to see by, but also bright enough to be seen. Every shadow felt like a threat, every sound like discovery. Voss's ranch sprawled across a valley that should have belonged to someone with better morals. The main house was a testament to wealth. 2 stories, painted white, with glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport. Outbuildings surrounded it, bunkhouse, barns, corrals, all well-maintained and prosperous-looking. It made Ronan's struggling homestead look pathetic by comparison. They tied their horses in a ravine a quarter-mile out and approached on foot. The house was lit from within, lamplight glowing warm against the cold night. Ronan could see movement through the windows, one of the guards probably making rounds. There, Lila whispered, pointing to the north side kitchen entrance, a door with a simple latch, no light visible beyond it. That's our way in. They waited in the shadows, watching the guard's pattern. Every 20 minutes, he'd circuit the house, checking doors and windows with casual efficiency. Not particularly alert, but not completely negligent either. When he disappeared around the front, they moved.
This
Lila
story
reached
was
the door
posted
first,
on the
her
channel
fingers
west
working
of
the latch
Betrayal.
with surprising
Please do not
skill.
repost
It
it
clicked
in any
open and they
form.
slipped inside, closing it softly behind them. The kitchen was dark and empty, smelling of cold stove ash and old food. Through the doorway, a hallway stretched toward the front of the house. Study's that way, Lila breathed, barely audible. They crept forward, every footstep loud in Ronan's ears despite the thick carpet that muffled sound. His heart hammered so hard he was sure it would give them away. This was insane. They were breaking into a wealthy man's house, looking for evidence of financial crimes, with armed guards patrolling. If they were caught. But they weren't caught. The hallway stayed empty as they reached the study door. Locked, of course. Lila pulled something from her pocket, a hairpin, and went to work on it. Where did you learn that? Ronan whispered. Father's practice was in a rough neighborhood. Sometimes we had to get into rooms when patients locked themselves in. The lock clicked. Useful skill. The study was everything Ronan had expected. Dark wood furniture, leather chairs, shelves full of books that probably had never been read, and a large desk covered with papers. Lila went straight for it, her hands quick and efficient as she sorted through documents. Loan agreements, she murmured. Property deeds, purchase records. Her eyes widened. Oh, this is better than I hoped. What? He's drowning in debt. Look. She held up a paper covered in numbers. He's borrowed against every property he owns, including the ones he hasn't fully paid for yet. And the terms, she scanned quickly. These are predatory. If he misses a single payment, the bank can seize everything. When's the next payment due? 3 months? She kept searching, pulling out more documents. And here, correspondence with the railroad company. They're considering 2 routes, not 1. If they choose the northern corridor instead of the southern one, all of Voss's land becomes worthless for transport. Ronan felt a surge of hope so strong it hurt. That's it. That's what we need. Proof that his whole plan could collapse. We need to take these, copy them, get them to the other homesteaders. Lila was already folding papers, stuffing them inside her coat. If Voss is forced to sell, we could buy back some of the properties he stole, redistribute the land. The bank won't sell to us. We don't have that kind of money. No, but maybe we can convince them to sell to a cooperative, pool resources, share ownership. Her mind was racing, already 3 steps ahead. It's risky, but it could work. Light flooded the hallway, footsteps, heavy and deliberate. The guard's voice called out, "Boss, that you?" Ronan and Lila froze. They were trapped, only one door out, and it led directly to the guard. The windows were an option, but they were second story, and the drop looked dangerous. "The desk," Ronan whispered. "Get behind it." They squeezed into the narrow space as the footsteps got closer. The guard appeared in the doorway, holding a lamp high, his other hand resting on his gun. "I know someone's here," he said. "Heard you moving around. Come out easy and nobody gets hurt." Ronan's hand found the pistol at his belt. He didn't want to shoot anyone, didn't want this to escalate to killing, but he also wasn't going to let Lila be captured, not after everything. The guard stepped into the room, lamp swinging as he checked the corners. "I ain't playing games. Show yourself." Lila's hand squeezed Ronan's arm, a silent message. He understood. On 3. They'd break for the door together. Hope's surprise gave them enough of an edge to escape. 1, 2. The guard turned toward the desk. 3. They erupted from hiding, and for a chaotic moment, everything was motion and noise. Ronan hit the guard low, driving his shoulder into the man's gut. The lamp fell, shattering, flames spreading across the carpet. The guard swung his gun around, but Lila was there, grabbing his wrist, fighting for control. "Run!" Ronan shouted at her, but she wasn't listening, was locked in struggle with a man twice her size. Ronan grabbed the guard's gun hand, twisted hard, something cracked, bone or tendon, and the man screamed. The gun clattered to the floor, but now the fire was spreading, feeding on the carpet and the papers scattered across the desk, and smoke was filling the room. "Ronan!" Lila's voice sharp with urgency. He grabbed her hand and they bolted for the door, through the hallway where more guards were emerging from the bunkhouse, shouting. Out the kitchen entrance into the cold night air. Behind them, the house was burning, flames visible through the study windows. They ran. The horses were waiting where they'd left them, spooked by the smoke smell, but still tied. Ronan and Lila mounted and kicked them into a gallop, not looking back, not stopping until they'd put miles between themselves and Voss's ranch. When they finally slowed, both gasping for breath, Lila started laughing. Wild, almost hysterical laughter that made Ronan think she'd snapped. "We did it," she said between gasps. "We actually did it. We nearly died. We started a fire." Ronan's hands were shaking. "Voss is going to know it was us. Let him know." She patted her coat where the papers were hidden. "We got what we came for. And even if the fire destroys everything else, we have evidence, real, documented proof of his debts and schemes. He'll come after us. Hard." "Yes." Her laughter faded, replaced by something colder. So we move first. Tomorrow we show these papers to everyone. The Homesteaders, the Brennans, Jesse. We make copies and we spread them everywhere. By the time Voss gets back from Billings, the whole valley will know he's a fraud. It was brilliant and terrifying. They'd crossed a line tonight from defensive resistance to active offense. There would be no going back, no possibility of peace. This was war now, open and acknowledged. Together, Ronan said, echoing their earlier promise. Together, Lila agreed. They rode through the darkness toward home, carrying papers that could either save them or destroy them. The fire at Voss's ranch would be visible for miles, a signal flare announcing that something had changed, that the victims had become fighters. When they finally reached their own ranch, the cabin dark and waiting, Ronan helped Lila dismount. She was exhausted, her face smudged with smoke, her hands scraped from the fight, but her eyes still burned with that fierce determination. "You should sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal." "So should you." She hesitated at the cabin door. "Ronan, thank you for not leaving me there. I told you, together." "I know, but still." She squeezed his hand briefly, then went inside. Ronan stood in the yard for a long moment, looking at the cabin that was slowly becoming a home instead of just a shelter. The barn where he'd been sleeping for 3 years, the fences they'd repaired together, the land that had nearly broken him but was now worth fighting for because Lila had shown him it could be more than a memorial to loss. He'd married her out of practical necessity. But somewhere in the past week she'd become something else, something he couldn't quite name but knew he couldn't afford to lose. The next morning brought chaos. Word of the fire at Voss's ranch spread faster than the flames had, carried by riders who'd seen the smoke. By noon, half the valley seemed to know that someone had struck at the untouchable Marcus Voss. Jesse arrived first, his wagon rattling into the yard with unusual speed. "Tell me you didn't do what I think you did." "Can't tell you that," Ronan said, "but we can show you why we did it." They spread the documents across the cabin table. Jesse's eyes widened as he read, his weathered face going from shock to understanding to grim satisfaction. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "He's been running a con this whole time, building his empire on debt and threats, hoping the railroad would bail him out." "And if it doesn't?" Lila asked. "Then he loses everything. The bank will liquidate his assets, sell to whoever can pay." Jesse looked up at them. "This changes the game. If the other homesteaders see this..." "That's exactly what we want," Lila said. "We need you to carry the word. Tell everyone to meet at the Brennan's store tonight. We'll show them proof that Voss is vulnerable. And when he comes back from Billings, when he realizes what you've done, then we deal with it." Ronan's voice was steady. "Together." By evening, 15 families had gathered at the store. The back room was packed, people standing shoulder to shoulder, all of them wanting to see the documents that supposedly proved Voss's downfall. Lila presented the evidence with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. She walked them through the loan agreements, the correspondence with the railroad, the pattern of intimidation and fraud. By the time she finished, the room was silent with a kind of shocked understanding. "He's been lying to us for years," Tom Henderson said finally, "making us think he was invincible when he's one bad season away from bankruptcy." "Which is why he's been so aggressive," Mrs. Brennan added. "He needs to consolidate his holdings before the whole house of cards collapses." "So what do we do?" someone asked from the back. "Even if he's in debt, he's still got money and men. How does knowing this help us?" "Leverage," Lila's eyes gleamed. "We take this
story was
information to the
posted
bank
on
in
the
Helena.
channel west of
Show
the
them that
trail.
Voss is a bad
Please do
risk,
not repost
that he's been
it in
using
any
their money
form.
to fund illegal intimidation. Banks hate scandal. They'll call in his loans, force him to liquidate." "And we buy the land back," William Brennan said, understanding dawning. "Pool our resources, form a cooperative. We can't match Voss's wealth individually, but together we might have enough," Lila finished. "It's risky. It'll take every penny we have, but it's a chance to actually win this fight instead of just surviving it." The murmur of agreement grew louder. People who'd been beaten down, who'd accepted that Voss was simply too powerful to oppose, were suddenly seeing possibility where there'd only been despair. "I'm in," Tom Henderson said. "Whatever it takes." "Us too," the Carlsons agreed. One by one, the families committed. Not all of them. Some were too afraid, too broken to risk what little they had left. But enough. More than enough to make a real attempt. As the meeting broke up, people filing out with renewed purpose, Mrs. Brennan pulled Ronan aside. You know he'll retaliate. Voss isn't the type to just accept defeat. I know. And you're ready for that? Ready to see this through no matter how ugly it gets? Ronan glanced at Lila, who was talking with Jesse, her hands animated as she explained something. His wife, his partner, the woman who dragged him out of his isolation and forced him to fight for something beyond mere survival. Yes, he said. I'm ready. The attack came 3 days later. Voss returned from Billings early, probably tipped off by someone about the fire. He didn't waste time with subtlety or intimidation. This time, he came with force. Ronan woke to the sound of breaking glass and Lila's scream. He bolted from the barn to find the cabin surrounded by men, 6, maybe 7, all wearing the Triple V brand. One of them had dragged Lila outside in her nightdress, a knife at her throat. Voss sat on his horse in the yard, illuminated by torches his men carried. His face was a mask of cold fury. You've made a very serious mistake, Hale, he said. His usual charm was gone, burned away along with his study. Breaking into a man's home, stealing private documents, starting a fire that could have killed my employees. Funny, Ronan kept his voice leveled despite the terror coursing through him. I was going to say the same thing about burning my hay barn, and cutting my fences, and threatening my wife. That was business. This is personal. Voss gestured, and the man holding Lila pressed the knife closer. She didn't cry out, but Ronan could see blood welling where the blade touched her skin. Now, you're going to give me back those documents, all of them, plus any copies you've made, and then you're going to sign over your land. Tonight. Or she dies. Everything in Ronan wanted to surrender, to give Voss whatever he wanted if it meant Lila lived. But he could see in her eyes that she'd never forgive him if he did, that she'd rather die than let Voss win through threats. The documents are already in Helena, Ronan lied. Sent by courier 2 days ago. The bank's already reviewing them. Voss's expression darkened. You're bluffing. Am I? Ronan took a step forward, and 3 rifles immediately trained on him. You burned my hay barn. I burned your study. You threatened my wife. I threaten everything you've built. How far do you want to take this, Voss? Because I've got nothing left to lose. It was the truth. For the first time in 3 years, Ronan had reached the point where fear no longer controlled him. They could kill him, destroy his ranch, take everything, but they couldn't make him surrender. Not anymore. The moment stretched, tense and fragile. Then rifle fire cracked through the night, not from Voss's men, but from the ridge above the ranch, answering shots from the tree line. The homesteaders, Ronan realized with a surge of hope. They'd come, positioned themselves as backup just as Lila had suggested. Voss's horse spooked, rearing. His men scattered, confused by fire from multiple directions. The one holding Lila loosened his grip for just a second, and she drove her elbow into his gut, twisted free, ran toward Ronan. Chaos erupted, men shooting, horses screaming, torches dropped and setting grass alight. Ronan grabbed Lila, pulled her toward the cabin where his rifle waited. But Voss was there, dismounted, gun in hand. You've destroyed me, Voss said, and his voice was raw with rage. My loans called in, my property seized, everything I built, gone because you couldn't accept defeat gracefully. You destroyed yourself, Lila shot back. We just showed people the truth. Voss raised his gun, and Ronan knew with sudden clarity that this was it. The moment everything either ended or transformed. He stepped in front of Lila, shielding her with his body, waiting for the shot. It didn't come. Instead, Marshal Garrett's voice cut through the chaos. Drop the weapon, Voss. It's over. The marshal rode into the yard with 5 deputies, all armed, all looking grim. Behind them came Jesse Crawford and William Brennan, both carrying rifles. Got here as fast as we could, Jesse called. Soon as we heard Voss was back and looking for blood. Voss stood frozen, gun still raised but wavering now as he realized how completely he'd lost. His men were surrendering, hands up, no longer willing to die for a boss who couldn't pay them. The fire from the dropped torches was small, easily contained. Marcus Voss, Marshal Garrett said formally. You're under arrest for arson, attempted murder, criminal intimidation, and fraud. Put down the gun. For a long moment, Voss didn't move. Then his shoulders sagged and the gun dropped from his hand. He looked at Ronan with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred, hard to tell in the torchlight. You should have taken my offer when you had the chance, Voss said quietly. Would have been easier for everyone. Easier isn't always better, Ronan replied. They took Voss away in irons, his men following in a wagon. The homesteaders emerged from their positions, exhausted but triumphant. Someone had to have ridden hard to Helena to get the marshal, probably Jesse or William, coordinating the whole thing while Ronan and Lila had been planning their raid. As dawn broke over the valley, Ronan and Lila stood in their yard, watching the last of the law enforcement disappear down the road. The cabin had broken windows and scorch marks, but it was still standing. The ranch was damaged but not destroyed. We did it, Lila said, her voice hoarse. We actually did it. Ronan pulled her against him, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, solid and real and alive. You did it. You organized them, planned the defense, kept us fighting when I wanted to give up. We did it together. She looked up at him, and in the dawn light her eyes were bright with tears and triumph, and something else that made his breath catch. And we're going to keep doing it, building this place, building this community, making something worth having. Together, he agreed, and kissed her. It wasn't their first kiss. They'd had that perfunctory moment at their wedding. But this was different. This was a choice, not an obligation. A promise that they were more than business partners, more than allies against a common enemy. They were becoming something neither of them had expected when they'd started this arrangement. Something real. The kiss lasted only a moment, but when they pulled apart, something fundamental had shifted between them. Ronan could feel it in the way Lila's hand lingered on his chest, in the softness that had replaced the defensive steel in her eyes. They'd crossed from partnership into something neither of them had planned for, and there was no going back. We should check the damage, Lila said finally, her voice unsteady. Make sure nothing's beyond repair. They walked through the ranch together as the sun climbed higher, cataloging what Voss's attack had cost them. The cabin's windows would need replacing, and there were bullet holes in the walls that would take days to patch properly. 3 fence posts had been knocked down during the chaos, and one of the horses had a superficial cut from flying debris, but nothing was destroyed beyond fixing, nothing that couldn't be rebuilt. By mid-morning, the homesteaders started arriving. Not to help this time, but to celebrate. Tom Henderson brought his wife and children, the kids running wild in the yard while the adults shared coffee and stories of the night's raid. The Carlsons came with fresh bread. Mrs. Brennan brought news from town. The marshal had taken Voss straight through to Helena, wasn't even stopping to let him make arrangements for his ranch. Bank's already moving to seize his assets, William Brennan reported. They're furious about the fraud. Apparently Voss had been falsifying his financial reports for years, showing profits that didn't exist. They want to make an example of him. Good. Jesse Crawford leaned against the porch railing, looking more relaxed than Ronan had ever seen him. Man like that deserves what's coming. What about his properties? Lila asked. The ones he took from people. That's the interesting part. William pulled out a folded paper. Bank's willing to sell them back to a cooperative, like you suggested. They want to avoid the scandal of a public auction, and they figure selling to the original owners or their representatives will look better in the press. They're offering terms, not generous ones, but manageable if we
This
pool
story
resources.
was posted on the channel
The
west
conversation
of
turned to
Betrayal.
logistics then.
Please do not
Who could
repost
contribute
it in
what,
any form.
how to divide the reclaimed land fairly, what kind of legal structure the cooperative would need. Ronan found himself pulled into planning discussions he'd have avoided a month ago, offering opinions on water rights and grazing rotation. Lila was in her element, sketching out proposals and mediating disputes with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been doing this her whole life. Watching her work, Ronan felt something twist in his chest. Not pain, but its opposite, a kind of aching fullness he hadn't experienced since before Thomas died. Maybe even before that. This was what it felt like to build something with someone, not just physically, but emotionally. To trust that when you laid down your piece, they'd add theirs instead of tearing everything apart. You're staring, Lila said quietly, catching him at it. Sorry. Don't be. She smiled, quick and private. Just don't expect me to be coherent later. I've been awake for nearly 30 hours and I'm running on spite and coffee. You should rest. After we finish this, the cooperative needs to be formalized before someone tries to challenge it legally. But her eyes were bloodshot, and he could see the tremor in her hands from exhaustion and delayed shock. It can wait a few hours, Ronan said firmly. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. She looked like she wanted to argue, then simply nodded. Fine, but wake me if anything important happens. I will. She went inside while Ronan stayed to help the others continue planning. Without Lila's sharp focus, the discussion meandered, but it also became more honest. People talked about their fears alongside their hopes, admitted their doubts about whether the cooperative could really work. Voss had capital, Tom Henderson pointed out. He could absorb bad years, ride out droughts and market crashes. We're all barely hanging on as it is. What happens when things go wrong? We help each other, Mrs. Carlson said. That's what makes a cooperative different from one rich man owning everything. When one family struggles, the others carry them until they're back on their feet. And when we all struggle at once, silence fell. It was the question nobody wanted to ask, but everyone was thinking. Frontier life was unpredictable. One harsh winter, one bad harvest, one outbreak of disease among the livestock. Any of those could cripple them all simultaneously. Then we figure it out, Ronan heard himself say. Together. Same way we fought Voss, by refusing to give up, by being smarter than the problems. It won't always work. We'll lose some fights, but at least we'll be losing on our own terms instead of someone else's. The words surprised him as much as they did the others. When had he become the one offering reassurance? When had he stopped being the man who just wanted to be left alone and started being someone who believed in community? Probably around the time Lila Mercer walked into his life and refused to let him stay buried in his grief. The meeting broke up around noon, everyone needing to return to their own neglected chores. Jesse lingered, helping Ronan start repairs on the fence while they talked. You did good, the old man said, standing up to Voss like that. A lot of people thought you were too broken to fight. I was, Ronan admitted. But Lila, she didn't let me stay that way. She's something special, that wife of yours. Jesse hammered a post into position with practiced efficiency. You planning to tell her that? Or just keep sleeping in the barn like a fool? Heat crawled up Ronan's neck. We haven't. Boy, I've been driving supply wagons for 30 years. I see things. And what I see is two people who've earned the right to stop being scared of each other. He fixed Ronan with a knowing look. She married you, fought beside you, nearly died for you. What more do you need before you let yourself actually have something good? The question haunted Ronan for the rest of the afternoon. What was he waiting for? Permission? Some guarantee that if he opened up completely, it wouldn't end in the same pain that Thomas's death had brought? There were no guarantees. Life had taught him that brutally. But maybe Jesse was right. Maybe he'd already been given everything he needed to take the risk, and he was just too stubborn or scared to recognize it. When he finally went inside as evening fell, he found Lila awake, sitting at the table with papers spread around her. She'd changed out of her torn nightdress into work clothes, and her hair was loose around her shoulders in a way he rarely saw. Thought you were resting, he said. I was. For about 2 hours. Then my brain wouldn't stop working. She gestured at the papers. I've been thinking about the cooperative structure. If we model it after the Rochdale principles, equal voting rights, democratic control, profit distribution based on participation, we could create something that actually serves everyone instead of concentrating power. Lila, he moved closer. Can we talk about something else? She looked up, and he saw wariness flash across her face. What about? Us. The word felt enormous. What we're doing. What this is. I thought we established that, partners, fighting to keep the ranch. Is that all it is? Ronan pulled out the chair across from her, sat down. Because what happened this morning, that kiss, that wasn't about partnership. Lila's hand stilled on the papers. No, it wasn't. So what was it? I don't know. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't come here expecting to feel anything beyond professional cooperation. You made it very clear you wanted practical, not emotional. And I was fine with that because emotional attachments had only ever complicated my life. She met his eyes. But then you were willing to die for me last night, stepped in front of Voss's gun without hesitation. And I realized I'd be devastated if anything happened to you. Not because it would make the ranch harder to manage, but because I'd miss you, the real you, underneath all the walls. Ronan's throat tightened. I'd miss you too, more than miss. I'm not good at this, talking about feelings. Thomas and I never... He stopped, struggling for words. What we had was important, but it wasn't this. It wasn't romantic. Just two people trying to survive who got closer than they probably should have given how people talk. And when he died, I thought I'd used up my chance at having someone who mattered. But, Lila prompted gently, but you showed up and proved me wrong. He reached across the table, took her hand. You're sharp and stubborn, and you see through every defense I put up. You scare the hell out of me, and somewhere in the past few weeks I stopped being able to imagine doing this without you. Not just the ranch work, any of it. Life. Lila's eyes were bright with tears. I scare you? Terrify me. Because if I let myself love you and something happens, it will hurt, she finished. Just like it hurt when my father died. Just like it hurt when Thomas died. That's what caring about people costs, Ronan. But the alternative is living in that barn forever, alone and safe and slowly disappearing. She squeezed his hand. I don't want that for you. And I don't want it for us. Us, he repeated. Is that what we are now? I think we've been us since I refused to get back on that supply wagon. Her smile was tremulous. Maybe longer. Maybe from the moment you decided to write to Mrs. Havering instead of just accepting defeat. Ronan stood, moved around the table, pulled her up into his arms. She came willingly, fitting against him like she belonged there. When he kissed her this time, it was slower, deeper, with the weight of everything they'd survived together and everything they were choosing to risk. I love you, he said when they finally broke apart. The words felt rusty from disuse, but also right. True. I don't know when it happened, but I do. I love you too. Lila's hands framed his face. And I'm staying. In the cabin, I mean. No more barn sleeping. We're married. We should act like it. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She kissed him again, softer. Now come to bed. Actual bed. It's been a very long night, and I want to fall asleep next to my husband. That night, for the first time since Thomas died, Ronan slept in the cabin. Lila curled against him, her breathing steady and warm against his chest. Outside, the ranch settled into darkness. The cattle lowed softly. The horses shifted in their stalls. Everything was damaged but standing, broken but repairable. Like him, Ronan thought, as sleep finally claimed him. Like them both. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. The cooperative was formalized with help from a lawyer in Helena who specialized in agricultural collectives. 15 families pooled their resources and collectively purchased 8 of the properties Voss had seized, including 2 prime parcels with good water access. The bank took a loss on the deal, but decided it was better than the publicity nightmare of being associated with Voss's fraud. Voss himself was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. His remaining assets were liquidated to pay back his creditors, leaving him with nothing. Some people said it was too harsh. Ronan thought it was about right. The Triple Vive Ranch was broken up and sold in pieces. Tom Henderson bought the main house at auction, planning to convert it into a boarding house for travelers once the railroad came through. Carl Davis, Voss's former foreman, was arrested as an accessory to arson
This
and
story was
intimidation.
posted on the
The
channel
rest of
west
Voss's
of
hands
Betrayal.
scattered,
Please
finding
do
work
not
where they
repost
could,
it
or
in any
leaving the
form.
territory entirely. Through it all, Ronan and Lila worked side by side, rebuilding what had been damaged and creating what had never existed. They replaced the cabin windows with better glass, added a second room to give them more space, dug the well Ronan had been meaning to dig for 3 years. The hay barn was rebuilt with help from the cooperative, larger and sturdier than before. By late November, as the first serious snow fell, the ranch was in better shape than it had been in years. They had enough hay stored to feed the cattle through winter. The fences were solid. The cabin was weatherproof and warm, and Ronan was happy. It felt strange to even think the word. Happiness seemed like something that happened to other people, not to men who'd lost their partners and spent years hiding from life. But there was no other word for what he felt when he woke up next to Lila, or when they worked together in comfortable silence, or when she'd look up from her account books and smile at him for no reason except that he was there. One evening in December, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Lila made an announcement. "I'm pregnant." Ronan's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "What?" "Pregnant, with child, due sometime in early summer, if my calculations are correct." She was watching him carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. "I know we didn't plan for this. We barely planned for marriage, but I'm happy about it. Terrified, but happy. A baby. His baby. Their baby." The concept was so enormous, Ronan couldn't quite process it. He set down his cup before he dropped it. "Say something," Lila said, her voice uncertain now. "Please." "I don't—" He swallowed hard. "Are you sure? About being pregnant, I mean, not about being happy." "I believe that part." Mrs. Brennan confirmed it. "She's helped birth half the children in this valley. She knows the signs." Lila's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. "I'm sure." Ronan crossed to her, knelt beside her chair, put his hand over hers. "Then I'm happy too. Terrified. Definitely terrified. But happy." Her smile broke through like sunrise. "Really? Really?" He kissed her, tasting salt from tears he hadn't realized she was crying. "We're going to be terrible at this." "Probably." She laughed through the tears. "But we'll figure it out, same way we figured out everything else." "Together," he said, and she nodded. Together. Winter passed slowly, the way it always did in Montana. Snow piled high, and the temperature dropped low enough that the horses' water froze solid every night. But the cabin stayed warm, and they had enough supplies to last until spring. The cooperative held monthly meetings in town, weather permitting, where everyone shared resources and knowledge and complaints about the isolation. Ronan found himself looking forward to those meetings. The man who'd spent 3 years avoiding human contact now actively sought it out. He liked hearing about other people's struggles and successes, liked feeling part of something larger than just his own survival. Lila's pregnancy progressed without major problems, though she got sick most mornings and complained constantly about how none of her clothes fit properly. Mrs. Brennan checked on her regularly, bringing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes from families whose children had outgrown them. In March, Tom Henderson's boarding house opened in the old Voss mansion. The irony of turning the symbol of one man's greed into a community gathering place wasn't lost on anyone. The first guests were railroad surveyors, confirming that the southern route through the valley would indeed be built. The cooperative immediately began planning for how to leverage the new transportation access. Spring came late that year, snow lingering into April. But when it finally arrived, the valley transformed into the kind of beauty that made all the hardship feel worth it. Wildflowers covered the hills. The creek ran high with snowmelt. New calves stumbled around on stick legs, learning to walk. And Lila's due date approached. "I don't want to do this," she announced one morning in early June, her back aching and her patience gone. "I've changed my mind. Someone else can have this baby." "Doesn't work that way," Ronan said, trying not to smile. "Don't laugh at me. You're not the one who feels like you swallowed a cow." She shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Brennan keeps saying first babies are always late. What if this one doesn't come until July? I'll die. I'll actually die from being pregnant forever." "You won't die." "You don't know that." But she was smiling despite the complaining. "Though I suppose if I survived Voss trying to kill me, I can survive childbirth. That's the spirit." The baby came 3 days later, on a morning so beautiful it seemed designed for new beginnings. Lila's labor started just after dawn, and by the time Mrs. Brennan arrived with her supplies and her no-nonsense efficiency, things were moving fast. Ronan was banished to the yard where he paced and worried and tried to pretend he wasn't terrified. The Brennans came, and Jesse, and even Tom Henderson with his wife, all of them offering support or distraction or both. The women went inside to help. The men stayed outside and tried to look useful. "First one's always the hardest," Jesse said, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "But Mrs. Brennan's delivered more babies than anyone in the territory. Your wife's in good hands." "I know." But knowing didn't stop the fear. Women died in childbirth all the time, especially out here where doctors were scarce and complications had no easy solutions. If something went wrong, he couldn't finish the thought. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, then started its descent. From inside the cabin came sounds that made Ronan's chest hurt. Lila's cries of pain, the low murmur of the women's voices, the creak of floorboards as they moved around. Then, just as the sun touched the western mountains, a different sound, high and angry and absolutely perfect. A baby crying. Ronan was moving before conscious thought caught up, through the door and into the cabin where Mrs. Brennan was cleaning a tiny red-faced creature that was screaming its lungs out. And in the bed, exhausted but alive and smiling, was Lila. "Boy," Mrs. Brennan announced. "Good size, healthy lungs, all his parts in the right places. You want to hold your son?" Ronan approached like the baby might explode if he moved too fast. Mrs. Brennan placed the small, warm bundle in his arms, and suddenly nothing else existed. Just this tiny person, his son, who was staring up at him with unfocused eyes like he was trying to figure out who this strange giant was. "Hi," Ronan whispered. His voice cracked. "Hi, I'm your father, and I promise I'm going to try really hard not to mess this up." The baby made a noise that might have been agreement or might have been gas. Either way, Ronan loved him instantly and completely. "What do we name him?" Lila asked. She looked wrecked, hair sweat-soaked, face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were bright with joy. Ronan had been thinking about this for months, circling around one name but afraid to suggest it. Now, holding his son, he found the courage. "Thomas. If that's all right with you, for my partner, the one who helped me build this place." Lila's expression softened. "Thomas Hale. I like it. He'd be honored, don't you think?" "I think so, yeah." Ronan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, holding their son so Lila could see him properly. "Thomas Hale. Welcome to the family." The next few weeks were chaos. Babies, Ronan discovered, were tiny tyrants who demanded constant attention and had no respect for sleep schedules. Thomas cried when he was hungry, when he was wet, when he was tired but couldn't figure out how to sleep, and sometimes just because he felt like it. And Ronan had never been happier. He walked the floor at 3 a.m, bouncing the baby and singing off-key songs Thomas probably hated. He changed diapers and heated milk and learned to function on 2 hours of sleep a night. He watched Lila transform into a mother before his eyes, tired and overwhelmed but fiercely protective, figuring out what their son needed through trial and error. The homesteaders came to visit, bringing gifts and advice and stories of their own children's infancies. Mrs. Brennan taught them both how to swaddle properly. Jessie carved a wooden horse that Thomas wouldn't be able to use for years, but that Ronan put on the shelf anyway. Tom Henderson's wife brought soup and bread and offered to watch the baby so Lila could sleep. It was community, Ronan realized. Real community, built not through obligation, but through genuine care. These people had become family, not by blood, but by choice and shared struggle. By July, they'd settled into something resembling a routine. Thomas was sleeping better, Lila was recovering her strength, and Ronan was learning to balance ranch work with fatherhood. The cooperative was thriving, with 3 more families joining and plans to purchase additional land as it became available. One evening, as the 3 of them sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lila said, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" "What do you mean?" "If I'd gotten back on that wagon the first day, if you'd sent me away because I wasn't plain enough or biddable enough, if we'd given up when Voss first threatened us." She shifted Thomas in her arms. "We came so close
This
to not
story was
having
posted on the channel
Ronan
West
thought
of
about it.
Betrayal.
The version
Please
of
do not
himself who'd
repost
ordered a
it in any
forgettable
form.
wife and expected to just continue his slow fade into nothing. That man felt like a stranger now, someone he'd been in another lifetime. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted, "but then I remember I didn't have a choice. You didn't let me give up. You just kept pushing until I had to either fight or completely break. Was I that terrible?" "No. You were exactly what I needed, even though I didn't want to admit it." He reached over, took her free hand. "You saved me, Lila. From myself, from Voss, from a life of just existing instead of living. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me. You saved me too." She leaned against him, careful not to jostle the baby. I was running out of options, out of hope, and you gave me a place to belong, a reason to fight, a family. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the valley in shades of gold and red. The ranch spread out before them, not perfect, never perfect, but solid and thriving. The cattle grazed peacefully, the crops were growing strong. The new hay barn stood ready for the coming harvest. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, was real and lasting because they'd built it together. Thomas stirred, making the snuffling noises that meant he'd be hungry soon. Lila smiled down at him, that fierce protective love evident in every line of her face. "Do you think he'll understand someday?" she asked. "How hard we fought to give him this life." "Maybe. Probably not until he's older and has his own struggles." Ronan brushed a finger across his son's tiny hand, marveling at how small and perfect it was. "But that's all right. The point isn't for him to understand. It's for him to have better than we did. More security, more support, more love." "We can do that," Lila said confidently. "We've already done harder things." She was right. They'd survived intimidation and violence and fires and fights. They'd built a cooperative from nothing, turned enemies into allies, transformed a struggling homestead into something with a future. Raising one baby, even one who cried as enthusiastically as Thomas did, would be easy by comparison. Well, not easy, but possible, manageable, worth it. As night fell and stars began appearing overhead, they went inside together. Lila fed the baby while Ronan started a fire in the stove. The cabin that had once been just a shelter was now a home, filled with the sounds of their lives. Thomas's soft gurgles, Lila's humming, the crackle of the fire. Later, after they'd put Thomas to bed in the cradle that Tom Henderson had built and gifted them, Ronan and Lila lay together in the darkness. "Thank you," Lila whispered, "for letting me in, for trusting me even when it scared you. Thank you for not giving up on me when I was trying so hard to push you away." He pulled her closer. "I love you, more than I thought I could love anything." "I love you too," she kissed him softly. "And I'm glad I was too pretty for your original plan." Ronan laughed, the sound startling in the quiet. "You're never going to let me forget that, are you?" "Never. It's going to be the story I tell Thomas when he's older. How his father nearly sent me away because I didn't meet his specifications for a forgettable wife. Great. My son's going to think I'm an idiot." "You were an idiot, but you got better." She settled against his chest. "We both did." That was true. They'd both arrived at this ranch as broken people running from their pasts, and somehow through fighting and building and refusing to quit, they'd become something stronger. Not perfect. They still argued about fence repairs and account management and whether Thomas's crying meant he was hungry or just being difficult. But real. Honest. Partners in every sense that mattered. The ranch they'd fought for was theirs now. Truly theirs. Not just the land and buildings, but the community they'd helped create. The future they were building for their son. It was more than Ronan had ever hoped for when he'd written that letter to Mrs. Havering's catalog service, asking for someone practical and forgettable. He'd gotten Lila instead, sharp and beautiful and impossible to ignore. The woman who dragged him back to life and taught him that survival wasn't enough. That building something extraordinary meant risking everything. She'd been right about that, just like she'd been right about so many things. Outside, the Montana wilderness stretched vast and indifferent under the stars. But here, in this cabin, on this ranch, with this woman and this child, here, Ronan had everything that mattered. A place to call home, a family to protect, a future worth fighting for, and the knowledge that no matter what challenges came next, harsh winters, crop failures, new threats, he wouldn't face them alone. They'd face them together, just like they'd face everything else, together.